this company, in this regiment.
Each trooper will learn this operation by heart.
Tonight, we're gonna have to cross the river.
These crowds are gonna catch some hell.
Do is remember what you were taught. I guarantee you gravity will take care of the rest.
Indeed it will. Welcome to this special edition of Band of Brothers, breakdown and review, retro discussion, all of those things. I'm just going to say now that this particular episode is dedicated to one of my favourite actors in television and cinema history. And you can tell who that is from my avatar, the late, great Donald Sutherland, who passed away the other day and potentially introduced me into one of the most infamous American tank commanders in World War II, a character entirely completely based on fact, of course, Oddball from Kelly's Heroes. But let us not distract ourselves. I'm going to bring in my panel. Sorry we're a few minutes late, but needs must. So first of all, representing the great United States of America, just letting him put down his alcohol. It's
Ninja Turtles. That's American.
Good to see you, sir. How are you?
You know, I keep saying it week after week to you guys, and it's probably cliche, but I'm serious. Where this episode, the hardest part about hanging out with you guys is spacing out the stills. Man, I wish YouTube was better. We could watch the entire episode with split screen, but this is a powerful episode, man. So it's hard only taking these stills. I wish I could take a still every 2 seconds. It's.
Well, it would probably turn into a 7-hour stream, and History Bros only available for 6 hours. So, good to have you back, sir. How are you?
Me? If you put me on, is it me?
I have put you on. Yes,
am I live on the radio? Am I live? Hi guys, how you doing? Sorry, I was looking at the chat and Twitter. You caught me unawares. No, I'm all good. Thanks, Lance. I'm all good. Yeah, I got my quotes. Got a load of quotes, probably more than I'll get through today.
That's the more recent edition of Band of Brothers. The one I've got is the one with the more kind of traditional film artwork on the front, I think.
Yeah,
I don't know if I don't know if he updated it at all before he passed away, because he might have wanted to correct a couple of things. But
Blue Collar was saying just before we started that there's so much in this episode, and he's absolutely right. And this episode is basically taken from 2 relatively short chapters from the book. But again, I could just read out. I won't, of course, but I could easily read out in full the 2 chapters, and every bit of it is interesting, fascinating. So there's really no filler here, and it is a long episode, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Hour and 15 minutes long.
Well, somebody who was literally inside this episode was the inside man. He was literally on set, running about.
Good evening.
How are you, everyone?
Sir? Yeah, I'm very well, thanks. Yeah, I was gutted to have missed last week's episode. I'm back and fighting fit. But
right.
Yeah, I think so far everyone's been absolutely spot on with this. That this is kind of for me this is my personal favorite episode. I suppose you could kind of slot episode 6 and 7 together, and you've got yourself a full blown movie. It's essentially kind of one giant episode, one giant movie.
Do you know what? It's funny you should suggest that, because do you know what? I might have a play around in the edit suite and maybe do something like that.
Interesting.
Titles and
interesting.
Yeah,
interesting.
I could do a completely new Bulge movie, couldn't I? I could do a Bulge movie, do the Battle of the Bulge 1960s, maybe do those really good scenes in the German command bunker when they're commencing the attack and everything, and then cut to all the little Bulge films that there've been, and there've been a lot. That could be an interesting editing project.
Yeah.
What have you started? Inside Man? That's going to suck my free time. It's all right. I think that'd be a good one to do, actually. It'd be a good one to do.
Oh, plus, you guys know too, man. When episode's called The Breaking Point, talk about a well-earned title.
Yeah. Well, before we get into it, just a quick nod to chat. Woof woof woof. That's my dog impression. R.I.P. Donald Sutherland. And yeah, I mean, I was heartbroken. I mean, he had been around for a long time. But yeah, good to see James Willard, one of our regulars, back. Not sure who this chap is, but I feel like I know him. And then we have Janice Simini. That sounds very Italian. Love these chats on Band of Brothers. So interesting, fellas. Thank you so much. Top Gun. So that obviously that's Tom Cruise. Donald Sutherland, one of the greats. Keith E is here. Sorry, that should be my other dog impression. Battle of the Bulges, starring Sydney Sweeney. Yeah, well, we just lost Steve Sweeney as well. He passed away the day before. Donald Sutherland, British actor from Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, and every time I met him was memorable, and I met him 3 times. So, okay, all right, yeah. So, could you, before we begin, Inside Man, could you tell us roughly, start to finish, how long this episode took to shot and where it fell in the running order of production?
Okay, so in terms of its shooting duration, this was about, I mean, I was on this for about 3.5 weeks. So I would suggest maybe about a month.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that we shot, I've not actually seen in the episode. Just little bits and pieces, little kind of side scenes. I spent the majority of my time with the gentleman in First Platoon. So with Dyke and Mellet and Ali. And that was one of the reasons why I couldn't take quite so many photographs, because I was kind of quite embedded with those guys at the time. So I was considerably away from the rest of the background artists. So I was a medic with First Platoon. And all of those scenes around the haystack and everything, I'm there, but you'll if you blink in the whip pans, you'll miss me, but I'm there right next to Dyke and Mellet and
You're talking about on the attack on Foy, which is
on
like
Foy.
The second half of the episode. It's like an episode of 2 halves, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
The first is we get shelled on a lot, and then the second half is we attack.
Yeah. And this was in terms of its running order, its shooting order. We shot some of this at the same time as we were shooting, because we were down at the Hatfield House estate. All the the wooded area where the Foy set was, and all the snow and everything. So that was on the Hatfield House estate, former estate of Queen Elizabeth I. It's been used in many films. So an area was cleared for that section. As I said before, £1 million worth of snow. We knew this episode as the title at the time of shooting was. It was called A Question of Leadership.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, but I think it was maybe a title that was too on the nose.
Yeah, I can see that.
So so that obviously changed to Breaking Point. But yeah, we were shooting this in tandem with episode 6. Straight after this, we were on to episode 8, which was the final episode that we shot. So we actually wrapped shooting on episode 8. And as I mentioned about episode 6, now, I mean, I'm so sorry that I couldn't find the photographs for last week that I sent you today.
Right.
But there are a selection of photographs of the German attack, and that was actually filmed the day after the Hatfield rail crash. Now, Hatfield, the Hatfield, so the Hatfield House estate is directly opposite Hatfield train station.
Yeah.
And all day, and we had a 4:00 call time. So all day we had police helicopters and press helicopters, news helicopters hovering above. So all day we were rehearsing this scene. We shot it in magic hour. So just as the sun was going down, we shot that scene.
You're talking
So,
about the charge on Foy that moment.
no, this was this was for episode 6. You know, the when all the German armor turns up on episode 6.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. When they start attacking out the forest.
yeah, and
Yeah.
you mentioned it. You actually did mention it in last week's stream about, you know, there was, you know, a considerable amount was shot here, but only a tiny little bit actually made it into the episode. And you
I
were
know exactly. I
spot
know
on.
exactly the bit that you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, you were spot on by saying that, because we spent an entire day just rehearsing. So we had all of the mortar parts and everything that were there. There were flags in the mortar parts, so we knew where all the explosives were. So we would walk through. They would walk us through exactly where we were going to go, where we were going to, you know, get into kind of a prone position to fire on easy company. We'd be shown exactly where all of the armor was going to go, so no one was going to go down and get run over by a tank. So everyone knew where they were going to be, and we just rehearsed it and rehearsed it and rehearsed it and rehearsed it for hours. I mean, I'm talking maybe 4 or 5 hours, constant rehearsals, just making sure that everyone knew their place. And there were 500 additional background artists that were brought in that were basically first timers, first day people that'd never been on it before. And they were given blank firing weapons. They were given a you know, instruction on how to use the blank fire. They were real weapons, but they were firing the blank, so they're not blank firing weapons. It's a big distinction between the two. These were real World War II vintage weapons that could only fire blanks because of the inhibitor within the barrel. So you got the muzzle flash. Some bits of brass would come out of the end, you know, from the muzzle flash and everything. So we were shooting this scene, and it was a one-take deal. You know, we'd been rehearsing for 5 or 6 hours, and it was really, really intense when they started rolling the cameras. There were 4 or 5 cameras. Did the big scene, all the explosions were going off, loads of gunfire. You couldn't hear a thing. And one of the things that they had said to us was, we want a lot of Germans to be casualties. So when you're a casualty, the first thing you need to do is to make sure that you've discharged every single round in your weapon. So I had a K98 Mauser bolt action German rifle, and I was firing. I think it held 8 rounds. So I was firing, advancing and firing and advancing. And I thought, right, okay, I've counted 8, but I'm just going to cock the weapon again. So I pulled back the bolt. I fired, heard the dead man's click, and then, of course, I decided that that was when I was gonna get hit. So I go flailing about, and I've sort of dropped onto the floor. There's a couple of other guys next to me, kind of dropped into the snow, and they called cut. And then the director said, right, okay, what we're gonna do, we're gonna get a handheld in. We're going to get some handheld shots, and it's going to be carnage shots. So the makeup girls came in first, squirted all of our faces and tunics with, you know, and ponchos with blood, so that we looked pretty messed up. A load of blood was scattered in the snow. And this handheld camera kind of came in. And some of the background artists were assigned to do what's known as a kit drag. So a kit drag is, if you find a wounded man on basically on the ground, what you do is you grab him by the shoulder straps and you drag him behind a vehicle for cover, right? So there was a very good friend of mine, a young lad called Ryan, and he was assigned to do a kit drag on this one guy who'd fallen right next to me, and he was one of the new blokes, and he's grabbed him by the shoulder straps, and this guy's gone, no, fucking leave me. The camera's on its way. Camera's, I want to be seen. I want to be seen. And he's gone, I've got to fucking drag you. I've got to drag you. He's gone, no, I don't. And as he's pulled away, the fucking knob, right? Not only did he not discharge every single round in his weapon, not only did he not have the safety catch on, he also had the weapon cocked and the muzzle of the weapon was actually pointing at his face. So as he pulled away, his thumb pulled the trigger and he shot himself in the face with a blank round. Now, if you shoot yourself in the face with a blank round, it's pretty fucking serious. I mean, it's really
Yeah.
serious. And this was at close quarters, right? I mean, literally,
This
it was
is
in
on
his-
on the day when you film this sequence, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
This
Yeah.
is this is the attack from episode 6, Bastogne. Right.
Yeah, and of course, what's happened is there was it was deathly quiet, and then all of a sudden there was this bang right next to me. I thought, fuck. And my mate Ryan decides that he's going to drop to the deck, right, to at least make it look slightly convincing. He's kind of thought on his toes and thought, right, okay, make it look like I've just been hit. So with that, as he's dropped to the deck, the guy who shot himself in the face stands up and shouts, "Fuck! Fuck! I just fucking shot myself in the fucking face!"
Shit.
And everyone's like, "What?" I mean, bearing in mind there was like 500 plus people there, and all you could hear was Dale Dye in the distance saying, "If that man isn't dead yet, he'll be fucking dead by the time I get to him." And he ruined the shot. The guy ruined the shot, and of course, his face was pretty fucking messed up.
Yeah,
Really messed up.
He had to go to hospital, I imagine, did he?
Yeah. He went to the QE2 in Welling Garden City, just around the corner. But it was pretty horrendous. And of course, everyone's walking past him. This guy's sort of sitting there, and there's like the nurse and a couple of people crowding around him. And as we're all kind of filing past him, everyone's going, "Wanker, tosser, prick,
You idiot."
yeah, you fucking prick." And it was like that, as literally everyone filing past him was shouting was saying something under their breath, "You fucking knobber,"
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. So that was quite an eventful day. So that's the tale that I could have told last week on episode 6. So
I
apologies
remember
for
you telling me this story when we first met, and I'd kind of heard a version of it from someone else, but not they weren't as close to the individual as you. And
literally laying right next to the guy.
He didn't come back either, did he? To the production?
He didn't come back. No, there were quite a lot of people that obviously you had no idea of weapons protocol that was really kind of drummed into us by Simon Atherton and his team, as well as the military advisors, as well as particularly Captain Dye. He, as I said before, he was one of these guys who had said, if I see you walking around, just fanning about, pointing these weapons at each other, whether they're rubber weapons or whether they're the real thing, I'm literally gonna shove that thing right up your ass and you're going home.
So Bastogne, before we move on to episode 7 and I do my usual breakdown, as we said last week, wounded by your absence, Inside Man, it shot predominantly between 2 locations. One was the inside hangar forest set, of which is also used in episode 7, particularly the first half.
Extensively.
And then the second set, which is almost like the front part of the forest, if you like, which is in a real wood, which is what we can see on screen now.
Yeah, that's at Hatfield House, the Hatfield House estate. Yeah.
So this is part of the Hatfield House estate forest.
Yeah.
And this is where, again, they also spent a shitload on a snow machine. It wasn't a question of let's film this in the winter and wait for it to snow.
Yeah, it's strangely, and this is probably going to surprise an awful lot of people, it was actually quite warm. We had a really, really warm September, October, because this was particularly, I think Bastogne was shot mainly in the sort of beginning weeks of October. And we were actually coming out of it with our faces sunburned. So it was actually very, very warm, yeah.
I do remember it was a very warm year that year.
Yeah. It was very, very balmy. you know, props to the actors for looking incredibly cold in this in that episode. You know, they really acted their socks off. You know, because they convinced me that it was cold.
Yeah, no. I'm aware of that. So when both of these episodes were filmed in fairly warm conditions, did you have to do that? How did they get the breath out of people's mouths? Correct.
That's all. It's all done in post. That's all CG.
Really?
Yeah, that's all CG. All of that's CG.
They always say.
Yeah.
Whenever you see the best CGI is the stuff you don't notice.
Yeah.
So that's that I mean, it's extremely well done. Right. Well, let's do the usual. Let me I'll run through my breakdown, and then we'll cover our usual 4 areas. I'll try and get through this quite quickly. There's quite a lot that happens. So Breaking Point is episode 7. It's written by Graham Yost, another cracking script. We don't have the original script to hand because the catering truck was broke that day, so Inside Man had to eat his. But it's directed by David Frankel. It's got a pre-title sequence, which as with some episodes, not all of them, it's unusual they didn't go consistent on that, but it cuts immediately to Dick Winters talking about you don't have to have too many days of brutal combat for you to change dramatically as a person. Then we cut to 2 or 3 other veterans, and they're all talking about the experience of Bastogne and how there were dead people everywhere. Death was all over.
Yeah.
And one of the last to be interviewed pre-titles is a guy who says, I had a lot of trouble with that later in life. I believe it's this chap.
Yeah.
I forget who he's one of the real characters, but I forget which. Is he Babe Heffron? He might be Babe Heffron.
I think it is Heffron, actually. I think
he's the real Babe Heffron. And it's fun. I mean, we'll talk about it when we get to episode 10, but I like the fact that they didn't reveal who any of the veterans were in these intros until we got to episode 10, and then you sort of realized you'd seen a whole load. I guess we'll get into that on episode 10. Let me continue. So this entire episode is narrated by Lipton. And it's funny because when it started, I actually thought, oh, that's Webster, but it's not. Webster does the next episode. We open with some titles that tell us it's January 1945. The Battle of Bulge began on the 16th of December 1944, and it went well into the first few weeks of January. But by January 45, the momentum of the German attack was effectively over, and it was more about the Allies counterattacking or holding on to what they've got. So we have a scene with a group overlooking a map, and it's very immediate that everyone is cold. This whole episode feels cold. If you don't feel cold at the end of this episode, then something's wrong. You've probably got the heating whacked up in your house too high. Buck, Garnier, and Lipton are talking about how they're about to be in the woods overlooking Foy. I've been to those woods. I've been in those trenches. The trenches are still there. The shell holes are still there. They have been dug out a bit, but they are there. But pretty soon after this scene, we cut to. It's quite an interesting scene. It's suddenly there's a German officer on a horse, and I believe that whole scene with the horse is shot in the warehouse set. I believe because the lighting looks very, very controlled. It looks like the warehouse set. And Hubler, who's a character that I've realised got a lot more screen time in the show than when I first watched it. I'm going to come back to that in a sec. Steps out, demands that the officer halts. He turns his horse around. He tries to escape. Hubler fires off 3 shots, takes the officer out, and he finally gets his Luger. And he's showing his Luger to Christensen. And there's more shots of Christensen in this episode than I realised before. So it's set up very early on in Band of Brothers that Hubler is after a Luger. But it's also set up very early on in Band of Brothers that Malarkey is after a Luger. and I think when I watched this for the first time, I got their characters mixed up occasionally. So Lipton continues to narrate, and he's talking about the men in the platoon, how they're being led, and that their current Lieutenant Dyke, and we're going to get into a discussion about Dyke later. In case you people watching are wondering, we are going to get into that about how true the depiction of Dyke is or isn't in this episode. So that's coming. But it's talking about his abilities, and his abilities seem to be somewhat lacking. But then there's also discussion about other characters. There's lots of little bits of detail of information. Like, for example, Shifty is the best rifleman in the entire Easy Company. He's the best marksman. And I noticed that there's a little line where he says he undersells his abilities, but says his father was a good shot, but he's not. And there's little things like that I picked up when I was really paying attention for these rewatches. That they've set up a lot of very interesting character stuff with really minor details and minor dialogue, which is a really good skill of this show that was lacking in Masters of the Air. So there's a discussion about Lieutenant Dyke between various characters, including between Buck and Shifty. That discussion is going on in a foxhole in the woods of Foy when we suddenly hear a gunshot and we find out that Hubler has actually been shot. The Luger went off in his pocket. Everybody's trying to find out where he's been hit. This did really happen, unfortunately. And really unlucky. The Luger went off, shot him in the leg, hit the main artery in his leg, and he dies. And that scene is really, I mean, there are many scenes in this episode that are powerful. That scene in particular is really powerful because it feels actually like at the beginning that he'll probably make it.
Yeah.
Because he shot himself. So how bad can it be? Surely they're going to be able to get him to an aid station. He dies, but he's got so many clothes on that they can't find exactly where the wound is. And then it transpires later, even if they had found it because it hit the main artery, the chances of him surviving would have been extremely slim. And you've got to remember that these men are incredibly cold. They've been here for quite a while. They're undernourished. They're tired. They're exhausted. So the immune system of the body is not going to be top notch. So unfortunately, Hubler dies. There's a character that we've been introduced to. Now, unless I'm wrong, panel, this is the first character in the show who dies who's had a line of dialogue in nearly every episode and is someone we've known from the beginning up to this point. There are other people that have died that are like replacements, or there are minor characters that have been shot who haven't been in every episode. Like Mark Warren, we don't see in every episode. But this is the first character, I think, in BOB that actually dies that we've got to know to some degree.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think we're so invested in, we were so invested in him. That's what made it such a heart-wrenching, eventuality.
Yeah, there's a really good tie-in to his death in episode 8, which I'll mention next week. So then Lipton goes and informs Winters and Nixon, who are kind of at the company CP, which is a little bit further back from the front line. They're talking about the problems they're facing, supplies and so on. Some people have only got one round per man, and Lipton goes and informs them that Hubler has died, explains the circumstances, and Winters said, well, I would have expected to get this news from Lieutenant Dyke, and Lipton almost covers for him. He basically says, well, I was there, sir, so I thought I'd come. And then Lipton carries on to narrate, and he talks about Dyke, and he says he wasn't a bad leader because of his decisions. He was a bad leader because he made no decisions. Lieutenant Compton is doing a good job checking on all of the men, but we can tell he's very much a changed man. You can see it. And then we cut to another foxhole. We've got Garnier, Malarkey, Muck and Pinkella. And there's a lot of shots of Muck and Pinkella in both the last episode and this one, which is all to do with setup. Lipton argues how difficult, when people are complaining about Dyke, Lipton does stick up for him. He says it's difficult for any officer to come in and gain Easy Company's respect when they've all been together for such a long time.
Yeah.
Winters and Nix also talk about Dyke, separate scene with them, talking about him being at Yale, and he's kind of like, you know, one of those officers that's come in and expected to be fast-tracked, kind of a career army officer.
I think they used to. Sorry to interrupt. I believe they used to call. I believe they used to call them 90-day wonders. There were
you're right.
Two types that used to come through. There were the ones that were rushed through West Point that were called 90-day wonders, and there were the other ones which were known as the retreads, which were older officers that were taking up fairly lower officer rank positions when they were running out and they did need those replacements. But yeah, 90-day wonders, I believe they were called.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Winters talks about who he would replace Dyke with if it was an option, Buck Compton being the only choice. They talk about the other characters, which is a nice way of seeing who's available in this
next one.
stream. One of whom is, yeah, let me get that. Is that the bit we want?
Oh, no, next one, sorry.
This one?
Yep.
They talk about various other officers. There's one officer who shouts a lot of people, who we've not really seen before, which kind of felt very inserted to me. I felt like we should have got to have seen him in a scene somewhere else, but we don't. Peacock, who we do meet in Holland, and he's a bit so-so. No one tries harder. He's just not very good. Buck is the only serious contender, Buck Compton. And we see him lecturing them about safety. We see him going from foxhole to foxhole, checking on everyone, which actually Lipton is also doing all the way through. We cut to Babe Heffron and Garnier talking about how much Buck has changed, saying he's wound up like a spring. We cut to another foxhole, Muck Pinkeller and George Lutz this time. It's commented that Lutz is one of the few people that's never been injured in Easy Company. Lipton and Dyke have their kind of weird conversation. That's a really well done scene where Dyke kind of comes over and asks him where he's from. And he says, Huntington, West Virginia. And whenever that place is mentioned, I always think of Marshall University and the Marshall plane crash where all the students and football team were killed, which is Huntington, West Virginia. That's from the film We Are Marshall. If you want to watch that true story, it's very good. And there's a bit of sort of bonding going on between Lipton and Dyke, but it's very sort of almost
Forced.
fake.
Yeah.
Forced,
yeah.
What made you decide to join the paratroopers? And the actor who plays Dyke, and we'll get onto the cast later, I mean, assuming this is what was required of him, I think it's pretty good. Lipton says, I wanted to fight with the best, sir. And then when he goes to ask Dyke a question, he realizes Dyke's already walked off, which is a really, really good moment. Nixon is woken up somewhat unceremoniously from his little foxhole. There we go. Yeah, perfect. There's a photo of him being woken up, and it looks exactly like that, the real picture. Orders from division. One officer from each division is going to get to go home, kind of a morale boosting thing. Go home for 3 weeks, sell war bonds. So Lieutenant Peacock is the one who's chosen to go home. There's a funny scene where everyone's like really made up for him, and he's a bit overwhelmed. Oh, thanks, guys. But they're more kind of like pleased he's going because he's not very good. We cut to some camera footage from a film unit because there was actually a film unit with Easy Company that was in Foy. There is footage of that. You can track it down. They're talking about what the defenses are in Foy because they're planning on taking it soon. It's said that there's 3 tigers in the village. And then Winters is talking to Joe Toy, who's come back from an injury, and he wants to rejoin the front. His kind of arms in a sling. Winters tells him to go, but he doesn't. Another replacement is introduced, a character called Webb, who has a couple of lines of dialogue. And this is where we kind of get a Jaws scene where everyone's talking about their wounds. Various other characters are kind of brought in to remind us they are still here. They're on the front, like Sergeant Martin, Leavegott, Popeye, all brief sort of bits with them, but they're here. Christian's manning his 30 cal. And then there's the conversation talking about the legend that is Spears. I absolutely love this scene. So the men are still gossiping about did Spears or didn't he kill German prisoners in Normandy and how many? And then suddenly, as they're having that conversation, Spears like appears as if out of nowhere. And he's asking them why they're not reinforcing their cover. And they say, well, Dyke told us not to because we're only going to be here for a day, which turns out to be a really bad decision. And then as Spears is leaving, he turns to the men and says, would anyone care for a smoke? Because the rumor is he killed all the Germans when he offered them a cigarette. So then we cut to the 3rd of January, 1945, a bit of a legendary date. They come back to occupy the foxholes above the town of Foy. They're taking over from another unit, also from the 101st. Joe Toy is very unhappy because somebody took a dump in his foxhole. Lipton looks out to the woods on Foy. We can see some Germans running about. One of them's probably the inside man in a German uniform. Lieutenant Dyke says, all right, I got to go and talk to regiment, and just kind of disappears. Literally right after he's gone, artillery begins to drop in. Compton and Lipton take cover. Trees begin to fall left and right. Joe Toy is running around, and boom, he is hit. And Lipton's narrating this, and he said that he quite enjoyed it when the first barrage came in because it was like the 4th of July. Of course, that's a comment that he'll regret saying later. Do you want that one up?
The previous one.
Or that one?
Yeah, you can see the artillery going off.
Yeah. So this is that's the Foy set, which I'm going to talk about later. And we'll get into that. Yeah, so artillery's dropping in left and right. We cut from Lipton and we pan down. There's this really clever shot where we pan along Joe Toy and we see his leg has actually been decapitated. Horrific moment in the makeup is incredible in this scene as well. It is absolutely gut-wrenching. I remember the first time I saw that shot, just pulling my knees up to my chest. It made me feel
the way it goes from right here and pans down slowly.
Yeah,
so, you know something's gonna happen. Like
then you've got this kind of moment of silence, and then suddenly they can hear like one person screaming. Lipton's telling everyone, "Stay in your foxholes," and Joe Toy keeps saying, "I've got to get up. I've got to get up. I've got to get my helmet." And it's just like, oh, that scene is fucking heartbreaking. Really? Malarkey and Garnier, then they hear him. So Garnier gets up out of his foxhole to go and find Joe. Then a second round of strikes come in, which is a common tactic of the Germans. They would do one round of bombardment. They'd wait a couple of minutes, wait for people to think they were safe, and then they'd send in another round. Loads more explosions come in. Now we pan across and we see that Garnier has also been hit. And then Dyke comes running in. Lieutenant Lipton, Sergeant Lipton, you organize things here. I'm going for help. And then he disappears again. And thus Dyke's contribution to this part of the war ends, at least for today. Buck finds Garnier and Toy. And there's this really good shot, which is in the opening credits, where we kind of hold on Buck and he takes his helmet off. And this is a guy that is already suffering from PTSD. He's kind of a bit disconnected from himself. We know this is going to push him right to the breaking point, funnily enough. It's going to push him over the edge. We just know that. So at this point, Malarkey arrives, finds Garnier's leg half hanging off, almost connected to his body just by a thread. There it is. Again, incredible makeup in this sequence. Luz and the barrage stopped. Luz and Lipton go and check on Buck, and Lipton and Buck have a conversation, and Lipton decides to take Buck off the line, make him go to the aid station for a few days. And there's in the narration, it says, just how meaningful that can be to get a man off the line.
Shot there.
Thank you for that. Amputated, not decapitated. You're absolutely correct. So I'm going quite quickly here, so my brain might not keep up with my speech occasionally. Yeah. And at that point, we're kind of taken out of the artillery bombardment, and we have a bit of a montage of Malarkey visiting Buck in the medical camp, which is here. I think in reality, that aid station probably would have been a bit further back. Probably would have been in one of the major towns rather than out in the open. And Malarkey is reading letters out loud to Buck. that he's received from home. Buck doesn't even want to hear him. At one point, he kind of grabs the letter and pushes it away, and he's sort of turning away. And this man is completely broken. Lipton continues to narrate. He informs us that the woods above Foy were finally cleared, and they're preparing for the assault on Foy. We cut to George Lutz. He's imitating Dyke. Lipton kind of takes him to one side and tells him not to put down Dyke in front of the other men because it's not helpful. We're now on January 9th, and another barrage comes in. George Lutz is running for cover. He's trying to get to the foxhole that Muck and Pinkella are in. That foxhole takes a direct hit. Both of them are instantly killed. Lutz ends up in a foxhole with Lipton. Another character gets hit in the shoulder. There's a dud round that lands right near Lipton. And Lutz and Lipton takes a puff of Lutz's cigarette. I thought you didn't smoke. I don't.
I do now.
We're now informed in the narration that Malarkey mentally is hit hard by this particular event.
I see it, Lance. This was the hardest screenshot for me to capture. Right there.
Yeah, this is the direct hit on their
and then just incinerates. Almost like,
Christ, look at that.
Yeah.
That's it's this whole sequence is horrendous.
Yeah, I was mashing the pause button.
Yeah, it's really tough. I think that this episode could have been even more powerful if one of the characters that died in this kind of circumstances was given even more screen time. So if like either Muck and Pinkella had even more dialogue at the beginning. Because when the first time I watched Band of Brothers, I couldn't even remember who they were. I mean, to be fair, it's an ensemble piece and there's a lot of characters. That's an interior set right there, by the way. That is in the warehouse, that shot.
Wow.
Incredible, isn't it? Incredible production design. So cracking on through, because I want to get through this so we can get to the good stuff. Again, we see Lipton being a good leader. Malarkey's holding on to his crucifix. Everyone's worried about him. We hear in the narration, Lipton asks him about the Luger, and Lipton gives him Hubler's Luger. Then Winters offers to have him taken off the line, maybe go and work for Winters for a few days as his runner, but Malarkey refuses. But he says, well, at least go and say goodbye to Buck. And then Lipton talking about how even just getting 50 yards away from the front line for a couple of days could make a really big difference to a soldier, which is very true. He talks about the guy he found who's trying to dig a foxhole with his bare hands. Again, I believe that section's in the book. Compton is sent on leave. We don't know for how long, but we know it's going to be for a while. So he's basically taken off the front line completely. Lipton talks about keeping morale up, and then it's time for them to conduct the assault on Foy. Lipton's beginning to wonder if any of them are going to get through the war unscathed at all. He goes to see Winters talking about Dyke, and he basically says that Dyke is a empty uniform. I love that description. He's not really there. But the attack on Foy is going ahead, and Dyke's going to be in charge of the attack, whether they like it or not. So the attack goes ahead. This is a really big action scene, extremely well directed. And as they go to charge in, which Winters can't conduct personally, that's one of the few shots that's got a bit of a plate shot in the background, by the way, that previous frame. That there, yeah. If you look on the right, the end of that row of trees, that's a plate shot to take out the rest of the background and give it the whole winter effect. So the attack stalls when Dyke loses control and orders everybody to halt, even though they're out in the open. Lots of people start getting shot. It all gets into a bit of a calamity. There's a sniper in the roof. There's an MG in the tower. There's an 88 further in the village. People are getting shot. It's all chaotic. Winters wants to go in and assist on the attack himself, but Colonel Sink stops that from happening, a.k.a. Dale Die. So ignoring Colonel Sink, he literally commands the good officer Spears, go in and relieve him. So Spears goes straight in to relieve Dyke. We'll talk about Matthew Settle as Spears later. There's a very cool shot where Spears comes running through the explosion. He immediately takes over the attack. He leads the attack. They put a mortar on the roof. They take out the sniper. Dyke is still kind of stuck behind this haystack. Now, there's a completely incorrect factual thing here where they make it look like Dyke is killed by a mortar round. That is not true. It did not happen. He survived the war. He was not killed in this attack. But that is the end of him in Band of Brothers. Spears then does his epic run through the town of Foy to dramatic music, and then he comes back again in order to coordinate the town being attacked from both sides. Eventually, the Germans surrender. They take over 100 prisoners. Sniper takes a shot at them again. A couple of people are killed. Then Shifty takes him out with Lipton being the bait. Set dressing for this whole stuff is amazing. Ken Webb is killed by the sniper along with 2 others. Conti is shot in the arse. And you'd thought that they were going to be taken off the line at this point, having captured Foy, but no, they went on to capture 2 more towns, just like Foy. We then cut to the church convent scene. I absolutely love this scene in the episode. It works so well, where this choir of nuns are singing, and they've come down to sing, especially for soldiers. And you've got this brilliant scene where during the narration with Lipton, he's talking about who's been killed, and you see those men and they kind of fade, they disappear in the sequence. They came into Foy with 145 men, and now they're down to 63. They lost 2 officers. They gained 1 good one, Spears, if the rumors were true. But Spears has this great line where he says to Lipton, well, I heard Easy Company has already had a good leader. They've always had a good leader. And he says, you don't know who I'm talking about, do you? And he says, it's you, Sergeant Lipton, and he's going to be made Lieutenant Lipton. Finally, Easy Company moves out in the trucks. I love that final shot where they're moving out. And then the episode ends with various quotes from Winters about, and Ambrose about the battle of, to hang on to Bastogne and Foy and the number of casualties that were caused in the Ardennes and how difficult a fight it was. Right, almost out of breath. Okay, that's a detailed summary of the episode, which is now finished. Those people watching will be pleased to know that now my guests are going to take over the majority of the talking. So we're going to get into this section first.
The first and finest company in this regiment.
Each trooper will learn this operation by heart.
So the story and the history, and the history of this episode really focuses on predominantly 3 dates: the shelling on the 3rd of January, the shelling on the 9th of January, and then the subsequent assault on Foy. And then there's also a dispute about Dyke. Let's deal with the events covered in the film first, those 3 sections. History Bro, do you want to lay your proverbial icing onto those 3 dates and tell us more?
Okay, yeah, maybe if I could talk for a bit.
You can talk for loads. Okay,
all right. So it's in the Ardennes forest, and what was always said about the Ardennes is that it's impenetrable. That's a classic thing from World War I, even in the 1870s. The Ardennes is an impenetrable forest. Of course, we know earlier on in the war that Mr. Hitler and Rommel were able to send tank divisions through the Ardennes. So it's not all that impenetrable. However, a lot of the accounts say that it was just very, very dense forest, very, very dense. And you couldn't see, this came up in the last episode, that you couldn't really see where you were. And it was extremely easy to get disorientated. Anyway, here's the first paragraph I wanted to read out. It just sets the scene a bit for the breaking point chapter in the book. So Ambrose says, during the siege, Easy had been on the defensive, taking it. The greatest disadvantage to being on the defensive in the woods was that the pines gave an optimum tree burst to artillery shells. But in other ways, being on the defensive had some decided advantages. By New Year's Day, the snow was a foot deep in some places, frozen on top, slippery. Even the shortest infantry movements were made under the most trying conditions. To advance, a man had to flounder through the snow, bending and squirming to avoid knocking the snow off the branches and revealing his position. Visibility on the ground was limited to a few meters. An attacker had little contact with the men on his left or right and could not see a machine gun position or a foxhole until he was almost on top of it. So, in other words, it's it's difficult. It's even more difficult to attack than to defend for the Germans in the first instance. There were no roads, houses, or landmarks in the woods in the impenetrable Ardennes, obviously. So the advancing force would report its position by radio only by approximation. So terrifying, really. Squads on the attack had to move on compass bearings until they bumped into somebody, friend or enemy. Ammunition boxes for resupply were hand carried to the foxholes as always, but in this case by men who had no clear idea of direction. Attacking in the cleared, glazing fields was equally daunting. There was only one road, Novelle Foy Bastogne, and it was ice-coated on top with black ice under the snow. German 88s were zeroed in on the road, which was also mined, but the alternative to attacking down the road was to come across country over the fields, which offered no concealment. So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place in all sorts of ways if they want to take Foy. So yeah, there's the bit where all about Toy that came back with an injury, and talk about how when you dig a foxhole or do any sort of really strenuous stuff, you, even if it's freezing cold, you still sweat and then get damp and wet from your own sweat. And the second you stop and have to sit still, it's even more cold than it would otherwise have been because all your underclothes are damp and they get freezing. And so there's a big section all about how you get cold to the bone because of that. And how there was just loads and loads of tension. Apparently this little period, these few days, the tension among Easy was just sort of off the charts. Because when you're fighting, when the Germans are doing stuff, or when you're doing stuff or preparing to do stuff, you know, that's one thing. But when nothing's happening, but you know it's gonna, apparently that tension becomes almost unbearable. Anyway, I've got another long paragraph here. We're told machine gun fire from directly in front of E Company, simultaneously supporting American artillery began to whine over the heads of the men. Immediately, German artillery fired back, but not as counter battery, i.e. not trying to take out the American artillery, but just firing on Easy and the companies either side of them as well. The German shells were landing in and on the paratroopers. As quickly as it started, the firing ceased. In Sergeant Christensen's analysis, the defence of the woods was a bewilderment and confusion to the Krauts, whose visibility was no better than ours. They had known that 2 battalions were moving toward their position in giant had they known that 2 battalions were moving towards their position in giant skirmish lines, the shelling and machine gun fire would have been much more intense.
Yeah, so these woods here, left and right of the N30, that road, by the way, didn't exist back in 44. The roads that existed were this one and this one here. These are the actual woods that the 101st were in. Looking over the town. There you go. I've actually been there.
Is someone eating a boiled sweet? It sounds like someone's chomping on a boiled sweet. Anyway, yeah. So the bit in the episode where the 1,000-yard advance through the Ardennes. Yeah, a bit on that. We're told the advance resumed. Again, machine gun fire broke out as the lead elements began to counter the German OPs, observation posts. American artillery resumed firing, salvo after salvo. German counterfire became intense. Cries of "I'm hit" and shouts of medics could be heard all along the line. Still, the advance continued. That's a thing that one of the vets at the very beginning said, that when you're in an attack, even if like your buddy right next to you gets wounded or injured, you have to sort of leave him. You can call for a medic, but you've got to keep going forward. Okay, so shouts of medics, I'm hit, but you have to keep continuing. Men threw grenades and fired their rifles at Germans retreating through the woods. After covering between 800 and 900 meters, Easy Company men referred to this as the 1,000-yard attack. The attackers came to a logging road through the woods. There, most of them halted, but some men penetrated a few meters into the woods on the other side to make certain no Germans were hiding there. Christensen was standing on the road with a few of his first platoon men when suddenly, to the right, there was the most improbable sight. A German soldier on horseback came galloping into view. As the Americans saw him, he saw them. He whirled the horse around and began to retreat. Corporal Hobler, quickly to get off 3 shots, smiled and jumped into the air, shouting, I got him. Christian found himself having the odd thought that he had been hoping the horseman would make his getaway. So a quick thing about a Luger. Nearly everyone wanted some sort of souvenir. That was a massive thing. There's a section earlier on in the book that goes on and on and on about how much of a thing that was, that everyone wanted souvenir, and sort of the best thing you could get, short of, someone's Iron Cross first class, short of getting the actual epaulets of a field marshal or something. Everyone wanted a Luger or a Mauser, or like a broom-handled Luger or a broom-handled Mauser, something like that. That's what everyone wanted. So it's not surprising that both Malarkey and Hobler wanted one. First couple of times I saw this, I got them mixed up. I was like, wait, the guy that wanted the Luger got it, then died, but now he's alive again. Anyway, I did get them mixed up, so we could be.
Yeah, because you didn't get Hubler. Hubler's in the show a lot, but he's only got a few lines. Whereas Malarkey as a character really stands out from the get-go, partly because of the performance. And I think, as Inside Man will tell you, a lot of the characters got about equal amounts of dialogue, but by the time they got them into the edit suite, it was some of the actors started popping more than others. And so those were the ones that ended up with more lines in the show.
First couple of times I saw it, I obviously knew what the characters were and the face of the actor, but I got the name mixed up with Lulz and Malarkey. Anyway,
Lutz, their two characters are quite similar as well in terms of persona.
Now, this episode is called Breaking Point, and what that really means is the breaking point of the men in Easy Company. You can only push men so far, just like Buck. You can only push men so far before they break. And a line from Christensen's memoirs said, "When you were convinced that your body could stand no more, you found out that it could," which is, very stoic. And, not everyone could. So a quick bit on Toy. Sergeant Joe Toy was in the open shouting orders to his men to take cover. They always said that if you hear the shells, you'll be okay, he recalled, because Toy survived, right? He did not hear the shell. Oh, sorry, I did not hear the shell. That was Toy's words. And then Ambrose again. It exploded just above him. Shrapnel all but tore off his right leg and hit him in the stomach, chest, and both arms. The shrapnel in his chest area was later removed by two separate operations, taking it from the back. So his terror is blown. It was almost blown apart, really. Unbelievable he survived. One line here, just Ambrose says, it's just a standalone statement. It had been the worst shelling Easy had endured in the war. So remarkable, really. It makes you wonder how guys in World War I could withstand bombardment for days on end, weeks on end sometimes.
Although anyway, they had slightly better cover with the trenches. Unless around landed in the trench. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Direct hit.
I wouldn't want to go on an immersive experience to compare and contrast. But
so Ambrose goes on about Toy. Toy yelled for help. He wanted someone to drag him into his foxhole. Sergeant Garnier got to him first and began dragging him over the ground. The shelling resumed. Germans had planned it well. As they anticipated, the pools had brought men out of their foxholes to help the wounded. A shell burst over Garnier's head. Shrapnel tore into his right leg, mangling it. After a few minutes, the shelling ceased. Lipton came out of hhis foxhole. Lieutenant Dyke called out to him, "I can still," and this is now Lipton's words. He said, "I can still hear him with that deep voice of his. He was about 25 yards away without his helmet or a weapon. Sergeant Lipton," he yelled to me, "you get things organized here. I'll go for help." And with that, he left. Now, that's completely inexcusable. As company commander, there's no excuse for that. If you want to send someone back for help, you send someone back for help. You don't leave the line. So there's this thing that, Dyke's been hard done by. He was actually a great soldier. No, not really. Well, so, okay. Earlier in the war, it seems his record was very, very good. He won 2 separate bronze stars for valor, for gallantry. Apparently, 2 completely separate occasions. I think one time in Holland, he was just right up in the front line with machine gun bullets and mortars whizzing around him, dragging wounded men back into cover and stuff. So earlier in the war, it seems he acted valiantly, or he showed dash in the face of the enemy and all that sort of thing.
Maybe it's a shame that the show didn't show that in a previous episode.
Right,
It might have been nice just to see him doing something gallant. Then you could have had a line earlier in the war. It could have just been part of Lipton's narration. Literally earlier in the war, he seems to be more competent, but like many men, when it came to Bastogne, it left him, something like that.
You don't get 2 bronze stars for 2 separate things for nothing.
No.
You don't get made company commander for nothing. However, by the time of Bastogne, or by New Year's, January 45, maybe the breaking point. Maybe he'd reached some sort of internal breaking point, because it seems he was doing anything or everything he could to get himself out of danger. And of course, we'll talk in a minute about what actually happened just outside Foyle during the actual attack of Foyle, which again is completely inexcusable. He was never court-martialed or anything like that for that, by the way. But anyway, I'll carry on. There's a line here again from Lipton that said, some of them were close to breaking, but some were amazingly calm. This is the men of Easy Company, that is. And then there's a bit all about Buck Compton and how he, reached his breaking point, really. And the people like Nixon and Winters saw it, after Toy and Garnier are blown up. And apparently Compton did have really bad trench foot. He genuinely did, but so did a lot of people. But they said, look, Buck, go back and get it sorted out. And when it became clear that he sort of was shell shocked, or he'd reached his breaking limit, by this point, even in World War II, they knew what that was. That wasn't new. Nobody would accuse a man of, especially a man like Buck Compton, a great sort of combat commander, of being a coward or anything. Well, if I can read this paragraph here, it talks all about it. This is one of the sort of best couple of paragraphs, I think, in the whole book, because it talks in more general terms about that. So I'll read it. It says, combat is a topsy-turvy world. Perfect strangers are going to great lengths to kill you. If they succeed, far from being punished for taking life, they will be rewarded, honoured, celebrated. In combat, men stay underground in daylight and do their work in dark. Good health is a curse. Trench foot, pneumonia, severe uncontrollable diarrhea, a broken leg are priceless gifts. There is a limit to how long a man can function effectively in this topsy-turvy world. For some, mental breakdown comes early. Army psychiatrists found that in Normandy, between 10 and 20% of the men in rifle companies suffered some form of mental disorder during the first week, and either fled or had to be taken out of the line. Many, of course, returned to their units later. For others, physical breakdown never occurs, but nevertheless, effectiveness breaks down. The experiences of men in combat produces emotions stronger than civilians can know. Emotions of terror, panic, anger, sorrow, bewilderment, helplessness, uselessness, and each of these feelings drained energy and mental stability. And this is a quote. There is no such thing as getting used to combat, the army psychiatrists stated in an official report on combat exhaustion. Each moment of combat imposes a strain so great that men will break down in direct relation to the intensity and duration of their exposure. Psychiatric casualties are as inevitable as gunshot and shrapnel wounds in warfare. Most men are ineffective after 180 days or even 140 days. Yeah, no shit. That's like 6 months, isn't it? Yeah, no shit. The general consensus was that a man reached his peak of effectiveness in the first 90 days of combat. After that, regardless of how good he is, almost, after that, his efficiency began to fall off, and that he became steadily less valuable thereafter until he was completely useless. And, that goes for like Buck Compton, for example, a great soldier, but you can only push someone so much. Just to finish here. By January the 3rd, 1945, Easy Company had spent 23 days on the front line in Normandy, 78 in Holland, 15 in Belgium, a total of 116. Statistically, the whole company was in danger of breaking down at any time. So there you go. It's an apt title for a chapter and this episode about breaking point. I won't read it because I've got so many things, but there's a bit later it says
sure.
They just couldn't believe that they kept being told to attack, because even after Foy they have to attack Noville.
Yeah.
And the guys just can't believe it that they keep being forced to do it.
Just sticking with the question of Dyke before we move on, and while we're focused on
I've got loads on Dyke.
I did a bit of digging.
Yeah.
And according to one account, because just prior to the attack on Bastogne, Dyke was awarded his second Bronze Star for action at Bastogne, where he personally removed from an exposed position in full enemy view 3 wounded members of his company whilst under intense small arms fire on the 3rd of January. Now, we don't see that. That's not portrayed, and maybe it should have been. The attack on the 13th of January into Foy, during the assault, Carlwood Lipton described Dyke as having fallen apart. Clancy Lyle stated that he saw Dyke had been wounded in the right shoulder and that it was a wound, not panic, that caused Dyke to stop. So the question is, and I think I've spelt Dyke wrong. I do apologise, viewers. It's not with a Y, it's with an I. So I better correct that now. I think it's D-I. Is it D-I-K-E or is it D? It is, isn't it? Yeah, sorry. My bad. My bad.
So,
I mean, so the question is, I mean, getting hit, taking a hit is not an easy thing. That will take any man down. The question is, I suppose, how accurate is the sort of way that the attack faltered? And I think the answer is probably some dramatic license was taken.
I mean, I think it's entirely plausible that somebody like Dyke, who has gone through that level of combat, and the recipient of 2 Bronze Stars, it is entirely possible and plausible that he had also reached his breaking point, the same as Buck Compton. It's entirely plausible. But it depends. We have to remember. Excuse me. We have to remember this isn't a documentary. That this is a television show, and it is trying to depict these events as accurately as it possibly can, but with a particular narrative. There always has to be a narrative in every story. And Dyke's narrative, character arc, is very developmental to this story.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, what we're getting is a condensed version of the second half of his conduct as a soldier. If there'd been another episode in the series that had come between Holland and Bastogne, there probably would have been screen time to show some of his more nobler doings. But I think, as you say, by the time he got to this point in the war, he may well have just been spent like many others.
So Winters wasn't impressed by him. You talk about a breaking point. Well, the company commander, that's the worst possible place to have someone like that. If it's a normal guy, well, you can just move him off. Even if he's a platoon commander like Buck, you can move him off. If he's senior brass, you could just sort of shuffle him out. But a company commander, it's a very specific thing, a company commander, where you go into combat, you go right up in the front line with them, and you're the brains in real time of like an attack and stuff. That is the one person that cannot lose their bottle, so to speak. So Winters was not a fan. So here's a line from Winters. Apparently, Winters said flatly, "Dyke was sent to us as a favourite protege of someone from Division HQ, and our hands were tied. He saw no solution. In a pinch, he was just going to talk to his sergeants about Dyke." And Lipton also said, he's just going to get. That's true as well. There's a fair bit in the book. It's funny, in the book, little things that are in the episode get expanded out, and things that take up quite a bit of time in the episode is just a couple of lines in the book. But anyway, there's quite a big bit in the section in the book where it's all about Lipton trying to tell Winters that he just, Dyke's not up for it. But there is the famous line that if you Google Dyke and like the real story of Dyke, You nearly always will find the Lipton quote. And anyway, here's a paragraph that's sort of probably the most famous paragraph about Dyke. Lieutenant Dyke, in Lipton's judgment, had, quote, fallen apart. That's what you'll see quoted again and again and again. He was frozen behind the haystacks. This is during the attack on Foy, of course. He was frozen behind the haystacks. He had no plan. He didn't know what to do. To the watching Winters, that was obvious. And then this is Winters' words. Here he had everybody hunkered down in the snow and staying there for no apparent reason. Winters was frustrated by his inability to raise Dyke on the radio. Get going, he shouted out loud. Keep going. No response. Easy Company was taking needless casualties. All it needed was the leadership push to get across that last open space and into town, but the leadership wasn't there. Winters grabbed an M1 and started to run across the field, headed for the stationary company and its pinned down first platoon. He intended to take command, get those men moving. But as he ran down, he thought, geez, I can't do this. I'm running this battalion. I can't commit myself. He turned and raced back. And then Winters' words again. As I was coming up, there was Spears standing right in front of me. Spears, take over the company and relieve Dyke and take that attack on in. Spears took off running. So my favourite bit of this episode, and I think maybe of the whole...
Well, you should say that because we're covering that at the end. That's under a different type.
Okay, all right.
Okay, I know which bit you're going to say.
Okay,
the same as mine.
Okay,
let's just stick with the history and the story for this section.
All right. Okay.
Our favourite moments bit is right at the end.
Well, can I talk all about Spears for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you give me a couple of minutes on Spears? Okay, so my favourite character is Spears. Because he's such a badass. It's almost like a fictional character. And of course he's not. It's sort of well documented, at least what he did at Foy. But here's a couple of paragraphs I'd love to read, because I think a lot of other people, I know a couple of my friends, their favourite character is also Spears. So if I can dwell on Spears for a moment, here's a section from Ambrose. It says, Spears was an officer with a reputation. Slim, fairly tall, dark hair, stern, ruggedly handsome. He cultivated the look of a leader and acted one. One of his fellow D Company junior officers, Lieutenant Tom Gibson, described him as a tough, aggressive, brave, and resourceful rifle platoon leader. His nicknames were Sparky, that among fellow officers, and Bloody with the enlisted men. He had led a bayonet attack and won the Silver Star in Normandy. Led a bayonet attack in World War II. Madness. Absolute madness. There were stories. The rumour mill swirled around Lieutenant Spears. No one ever saw it happen with their own eyes, but he knew someone who did. They may be just stories, but they were believed or half believed by the men of E Company. One story was about the time in Normandy when Spears had a major problem with drinking in his platoon. He put out a blanket order, no more wine, none. The next day, he ran into a drunken non-com. He gave an order, the non-com backtalked him, and he took out his pistol and shot the man between the eyes. The conclusion to the story goes like this, and he never had any trouble with drinking after that. Then there was the day in Normandy when Spears was walking down a road by himself and past a group of 10 German POWs. They were under guard and were digging a roadside ditch. Spears stopped, broke out a pack of cigarettes and gave one to each POW. They were so appreciative, he jumped into the trench and gave them the whole pack. Then he took out his lighter and gave each one of them a light. He stepped back up on the road and watched them inhale and chat. Suddenly, and without warning, he unslung the Thompson 45 caliber machine gun he always carried and fired into the group. He continued raking back and forth until all the POWs were dead. The guard was stunned. Spears turned and walked away. And then it goes on to talk about how... I'll read it. Well, Winters was not thinking about Spears and his reputation. He was watching Easy Company attack. Spears and other officers from the unengaged companies stood behind him. Winters had placed the 2 machine guns of HQ section to provide covering fire over the open fields, sloping away in front of them, about 200 meters across from the tree line to the town line. There were some scattered trees and haystacks in the field. Lieutenant Foley, who led the first platoon on the attack, described the situation. So this is now Foley's words. We knew that Foy had not been tested the previous day or scouted last evening. In the days before, we were well aware of the coming and going of trucks and tanks. We were witness German trucks and tanks. We were witness to the many attacks and counterattacks that had taken place. We had seen F Company get chopped up in their efforts to hold their spot. Now they were commanded by a second lieutenant. So the unknown was ahead. God, there's so many things I would like to read out, but I don't want to sort of really bogart the time, or if anyone else wants to say something. But I've got so many more quotes.
Anything in particular that historically, I guess we've kind of covered Dyke. That, I mean, I think the biggest sin that the episode commits is that they make it look like he was killed in this attack, which is bollocks. That didn't happen.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, yeah.
They don't specifically show him dying. What they do show is a mortar round landing directly on the haystack, which he's carrying behind, and there's very much an on-screen assumption that he's dead.
What Dyke?
Yeah. That's
right,
happens.
yeah. So
I think that's the next biggest sin after getting the death wrong of our man in the Carantan.
Oh no, he went on to be a half-bird colonel. He went.
No, I know he did.
Yeah. He went on. He went on after he was removed from command of E Company at Foy. He went on directly to be an adjutant or an assistant to General Maxwell Taylor, i.e. the command of the whole 101st Division. And stayed in the army after the war, fought in Korea, or was at least in combat during Korea, and became a colonel. I think a half-bird colonel. So he absolutely didn't die at Foy.
I think it's kind of it's sort of implied, or it's not specific, is it? It's very, very non-specific. So, when they're talking about, have you heard about what's happened to Dyke? Yeah, thank God for small mercies, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that thank God for small mercies line specifically implies that he's been killed.
Or maybe injured and taken off the line.
Or just removed from command. Just removed from command. But I agree with you, Lance. You're right. It does imply that he's dead.
It's not even ambiguous. It's very kind of signposted. Hey, he died over here. We're just not going to show it or specifically say it. But
all right. Well, then a couple more quick paragraphs then about where Spears reaches him. At this moment, Spears arrived, breathless. He managed to blurt out to Dyke, "I'm taking over." Sergeant Lipton and the others filled him in. He barked out orders: 2nd platoon this way, 3rd platoon that way. Get those mortars humping, all out with those machine guns. Let's go. And he took off, not looking back, depending on the men behind to follow him. They did. I remember the broad open fields outside Foy, Spears wrote in a 1991 letter, where any movement brought fire. A German 88 artillery piece was fired at me when I crossed the open area alone. That impressed me. Mad, right? The balls. Standing at the site in 1991 with Winters and Malarkey, Lipton remembered Spears's dash. He also recalled that when they got to the outbuildings of Foy, Spears wanted to know where I Company was, and so this will be Lipton's words again. So he just kept on running right through the German line, came out the other side, conferred with the I Company CO, and ran back. Damn, that was impressive. Which of course it is, isn't it? It's sort of, again, I've said the word sort of fictional, almost so unbelievable. It's almost fictional, but it's real. It was absolutely real, seen by and attested by lots and lots of men. So there's no doubt that Spears really did that. Absolutely no doubt at all. Which is just remarkable. Sometimes there's guys, it's very rare, 1 in 10,000 or whatever, but some guys are genuinely fearless.
Yeah.
They have genuinely sort of made their peace with the idea that they're going to die, and therefore are utterly liberated to do something like that. Just run up to and through the German lines, through the back of the German lines, and then do it again. I've read a lot of accounts of citations for Victoria Crosses and Medals of Honor, particularly Victoria Crosses in World War One. There's quite a few where it's just simply that. It's something like that. A guy will just run straight up to a machine gun nest and fires point blank and kills everyone in the enemy machine gun nest, and then does it again, and then does it again, and then gets killed trying to do it again. It's mad to us, weaklings as we are in the 21st century, compared to that. Well, but people do it. People do it. It's incredible. It really is incredible.
Thank God we don't have a battalion of millennials trying to carry out a crucially
Right.
important mission.
Right.
Inside Man, who got to play this extra?
Sorry,
being the sniper in this window. Do you remember?
No, I don't know. I'm afraid.
You must have been there that day.
1 second. Sorry, I'm just
that's
going
the
large on the
this
screen.
is the assault on Foy. So everything would have been
take him out.
everything.
Yeah.
Shifty takes him out. Everything would have been shot this direction first, and then you would have shot everything this direction, including this shot. I would imagine.
No idea who it was.
Well,
no idea who it was. Because you have to remember that, in terms of the Germans and the Americans, I mean, the Germans and the Americans pretty much stuck together. So there was a pretty definitive demarcation between us and them, if you like.
But you played both in some episodes, didn't you?
Yeah, I did, but it was kind of only when I think I only did it a couple of times, and it was only like for a day here and a day there. Whereas, and that
so
was
in this one, you were strictly playing Americans in this one.
I was the medic all the way through this episode. Yeah.
And who's that? Here we've got some shots on that set, and that's not real snow, is it?
No.
But it doesn't half look good. I mean, yeah, it really does look like real snow. And then obviously there's some post-production filters and stuff on that as well. But even so, looks amazing.
On Shifty's shoot, there's one line here where Popeye win. You hear Popeye, you see Popeye a bit, don't you? But it's not sort of one of the main ones. But anyway, he lived, and he said, this is Popeye's words. It just doesn't pay to be shooting at Shifty when he's got a rifle, which I think is a great line, because he's sort of the sharpshooter, isn't he, of the company?
That shot in particular, that was. Right, so this is the bit where we were coming out from behind the haystack. That's me in the center. So this is one of the major publicity shots that went out, sort of all over the place, and it was only one of my sisters had phoned me up and said, "Oh, I think you might be in TV Quick magazine. I think I've just seen a picture of you in TV Quick, like one of the UK TV guides." So I rushed out and got this TV guide, and I had a look at them. Oh my God, yes, that's me. And that shot, that actually ended up as October in the official Band of Brothers calendar. So you're actually also talking to a calendar boy here.
No.
And there's a reason. I've just quickly zip back to that last one, and I'll tell you there's a reason behind me having my hand on top of my helmet there, trying to wedge it onto my head. And that was that the front chin strap had broken. It had deteriorated just before we'd actually started to shoot, and I thought, oh fuck no. So I had a load of chewing gum in my pocket, and I'd got a big mouthful of gum, and I'm chewing this gum, and I'm thinking, right, okay, if I stick it between the actual helmet and the liner, and I kind of wedge it down, it's going to stick. So we'd already done the rehearsals, and I thought, I don't want it sort of dropping off. So as we come out, within a couple of paces, it just started sort of flapping about. The sort of helmet casing and the liner was just sort of flapping about. So I had to hold my hand on the helmet all the way through. And as we did that, so everyone was kind of was sort of dodging from left to right, as though they're sort of avoiding German snipers and machine guns. And I'm kind of dodging left to right as well. And remember, this whole place was just covered in this thick snow, right? So they just put the fresh snow down, and that actually covered over a load of the foxholes and the artillery craters that had been dug up there. So these artillery craters were full of snow, and you couldn't distinguish an artillery crater from just flat ground. So I'm running along, and I'm dodging in and out, and weaving all over the place. And it was Sergeant Ali, played by George Khalil, who was right behind me. and all of a sudden I stepped into this artillery hole, and I've gone waist deep into this snow. My helmet's come flying off, and this was a one-take deal, and of course George comes running back for me, drags me out of the artillery hole, grabs my helmet, puts it on, and of course, and he kind of carries me just past the camera, and I'm thinking, Christ, I've just ruined this shot, and everyone's watching. And Dale Dye comes over to me and he says something to the effect of, "Well done, soldier. That's exactly what happened." So, so I was, I was kind of quite pleased that my massive blunder, but I thought I was going to get.
You stayed in character. History, bro. You're about to read out a bit about Shifty, I think.
Yeah, no, it's just that one line about Shifty being you don't want to shoot at him when he's got a rifle in his hands. But all the time he was telling that anecdote, Inside Man, I was thinking that's just exactly. It's amazing you ended it the way you did, because I was going to say that's just really real. There's so many accounts of real life combat where someone loses their helmet, and it falls off.
Yeah,
and they get chewed out for losing their helmet. In Market Garden, you must know, Lance, there's so many examples of people losing their helmet like straight away.
Yeah,
straight away. So it happened all the time. Your chin strap broke, all sorts of things.
Yeah,
lots of people lost them on the drop in.
Yeah.
That's why there's quite a few shots of people in photographs not wearing them because they don't have them.
Sorry.
That last photograph that you showed of a guy with a radio on his back in the woods, kind of with all the sun bursting through. That was one of the days leading up to that final push towards Foy. So we kind of did that again and again and again and again. And it was, as you can see, from the sun bursting through there, it was a beautiful day. It really, really was a beautiful day. And we genuinely did get sunburned. But those other photographs.
Is that early in the day? Is that sunrise or is that late in the day?
No, that's actually as the sun's going down. That's towards the end of the day.
Right. Okay.
And the other ones were actually, believe it or not, were actually taken by George Khalil. Were actually taken of me and another guy by the guy who plays Sergeant Ali. So so he took these pictures. And of course, there's the haystack behind me there.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So, Lance, before you move on from the history thing, I've got almost a half a page or nearly a whole page of quotes that I want to read right at the end, which sums up Foy and Novell and the Battle of the Bulge and everything. So I'll do that for the end.
Yeah, do those.
But before that, I've got one
bit of
last
history everywhere, I'm sure. But
great. But if I could finish this bit with just about about 10 lines here about what happened after Foy or after Novell. So Ambrose tells us that evening, Colonel Sink called for a meeting at Regimental HQ for all the principal parties involved in the attack. Sink opened with a question for Winters. What are you going to do about Company E? And Winters replies, relieve Lieutenant Dyke and put Lieutenant Spears in command. Just flatly said that. Sink agreed with the decision and the meeting ended. Lieutenant Foley also agreed. He wrote, Foley, we were glad to see Dyke leave, not only because he failed the first platoon, but even back in the woods when the second platoon was hit with those 3 bursts. It was evident that Foxhole Norman wasn't meant to be our CO. They called him Foxhole Norman. Again, right, you don't get to become a company commander or get 2 Bronze Stars for nothing, but you don't get a nickname like Foxhole Norman for nothing either. And then one last line. It quickly became clear that Spears was indeed the man to be CO of Easy Company. He had already demonstrated that in the rush on Foy. Okay.
Fantastic stuff. So, in summary, the history of this episode and the story is pretty accurate, with the exceptions of Dye definitely didn't get killed. He did fall apart on the attack. He may well have fallen apart because he was wounded, which isn't shown here. But he, even if he was wounded, he did lose it, according to multiple sources. So I guess you can ultimately decide who you want to believe when it comes to that score. Okay, so we're going to move on to the characters and cast that feature most presently in this episode. So, I mean, one of the things we've not said in the 6 episodes prior to this is the actors really let down this episode. Wasn't the acting below par? Tonight is going to be another one of those nights where we don't say that. The acting in this episode is absolutely outstanding. I'm going to want to. I mean, I should mention everyone, but I'm going to focus on a few different people, and I want to hear some thoughts from my panel. But we're going to talk about Matthew Settle first. I think there are about 5 characters that this episode focuses on, with Lipton being the lead. It's his perspective, it's his narrative, it's his voiceover. I'm going to leave him till last. We've seen Spears before, but this is really, this is where we realise Spears was not a one-time wonder. This is a proper military man who will get stuck in, no bullshit. I love the line where he comes running up to the haystack and they're saying, we were talking about going around to the flank. No, we're going straight in. Forget going around. And he just takes command of the situation.
Yeah.
Matthew Settle got delayed at the airport when he came over for the UK. He's one of the few American cast. His work visa was not filled out properly, so he had to wait at Heathrow with one of the production team. And there's video footage of that on the making of Band of Brothers. He's had a pretty successful career as an actor, still going strong. 40 credits to date, some of them pretty significant. If you want to see him in another really good show in a very different role, I would suggest watching the miniseries Into the West, and we could definitely do a show about that sometime. It's kind of like an HBO, well, I think it's TNT that did it, but Spielberg produced it. Several episodes about the true stories of various kind of Western pioneers. Matthew Settle's got a great role in it. I've also got the DVD box set of this show, so I do recommend it. First-rate performance from Matthew Settle. You really feel like Spears through his performance. Does anyone want to add anything about Matthew and his portrayal?
I just think that he's got such an enormous amount of charisma, and he's one of those. He's one of those actors that, we know that he's been there. That he's kind of done these deeds as a character, that he's kind of with the 101st Airborne, even though that he kind of goes missing on several episodes, we still kind of feel his presence, and that I think is a testament to the way Matthew Settle portrays him.
Because he really underplays him, doesn't he?
Yeah,
He's very contained, but it works so well.
But you just still feel that he's kind of lurking around, that he's still there. You still feel his presence, even though he's not on screen or not in an episode. But I think as an actor, I think he's incredibly charismatic. And I think I've said that a few times before, that the only thing that I remember so vividly about Matthew Settle is he was always smiling. He was always a really happy kind of guy.
Right.
And one of those people that, if you can imagine somebody with that amount of charisma, drew people towards him. People wanted to be around him. He's that kind of actor.
I wrote to him and invited him on for tonight.
Oh wow!
Sadly, I haven't had a reply yet. I don't think he's seen the message, but he had the link, so he literally could have popped on while we were streaming, which would have been a lot of fun. But I have got some Easy Company guests confirmed as coming on before we do finish doing Band of Brothers. I'll talk about that at the end. But yeah, he's great. I mean, definitely, I've said it before, one of the most outstanding actors on the show consistently is Neil McDonough. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name right. Is it McDonough?
I think it's McDonough.
McDonough.
Yeah.
Like Madonna.
Yeah, McDonough. Yeah,
That's how I've always heard it. Yeah.
McDonough. So I rate this guy as an actor. Of all the actors, Mr. Dick Winters aside, I think he's probably been the one who's gone on to have had the most successful career of the cast. Rightly so. Absolutely amazing actor. He's done so many films and shows that I've loved. He has unfortunately done some Marvel stuff as well, but I won't hold that against him. 147 credits. There's a Western coming up with him in called Outlaw Posse, which I've not seen. Hasn't got a great rating there, but I will normally watch something that he's in just because he's in it. So there's quite a few things with that I haven't yet seen. The deterioration of Buck Compton is key to this episode working, because as we see, it's breaking, and it's different to see the way that it affects Compton as opposed to the way that it affects Dyke. Dyke's deterioration is much more subtle, and then suddenly he snaps like a twig. Buck effectively goes into shell shock. But outstanding performance. Anyone want to add anything about Neil before I move on?
I mean, yeah. No, everything you said, man. His performance in this is like, it's haunting and just a broken man. It's like from it. We'll get to it later, but my favorite performance of the episode.
He's got such a good face for this. That moment where he drops his helmet and just looks at those guys. They're partly dismembered bodies almost. That to me, that's an iconic image from the whole show. It's so iconic that they put it in the opening titles, if I remember rightly.
Yes, they did. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of those shots that sort of stays with you because you really feel for him, and I can imagine that represents thousands and thousands of soldiers in multiple moments across all the various fronts in World War II, where you saw someone you trained with who'd become a friend, probably a closer friend than many of the friends you made back home prior to the war, and you see them blown apart. No matter how tough a soldier you are, that's going to affect you, and it's going to affect you immediately. And you might be able to park it, but outstanding.
Yeah, I think Blue's description, haunting, I think, is hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, he's got the eyes for it. Peter O'Meara is an actor that prior to this I was not familiar with. He plays Dyke, and I think he plays him. He's very on the nose, but I think it works. You could argue Dyke wasn't really like that. Did that conversation, that sort of abstract conversation between Lipton and Dyke, really take place in the way that it did? Not really sure. It's interesting to look at the variety of other roles that he's played when you go on his IMDb.
I believe he's Irish, isn't he? I seem to remember this really kind of thick sort of Dublin accent when we were all sitting around the haystack, all sort of, shooting the shit, as it were, before the camera turned up.
Yeah, one of the other decent roles I've seen him in is in Nightfall, which is about the Knights Templars, and started off as quite a low, tight budget production, but got better ratings than everyone thought it was going to get. So then they put a bit more money into it. Look, there he is with two very young Game of Thrones people, and Mark Hamilton. So he's been about a bit. I think a good. How was he on set? How was Peter O'Meara?
He seemed very nice. I mean, I was only with him for a small amount of time, probably only with him for about 3 days. But he seemed very nice. Seemed very, very polite, very cordial, and seemed like a very, very nice fella.
I'm right in thinking he wasn't around for like the whole shoot. He was a guest actor, wasn't he? He came in and he went. Yeah. So good actor. Look out for other stuff he's done. I mean, there are other people in this episode that give outstanding performances. In particular, I want to mention Kirk Acevedo, who plays Joseph Toy.
Brilliant.
The actor who plays William Garnier, Frank John Hughes. The two of them doing that scene. I love that line. Told you I was going to get back to America first. He's getting carried off in the stretcher. They both have pretty significant time in it. One of the other actors that some people miss often in Band of Brothers, of course, is our good own British Jamie Bamber, and he's in most of the show, but he's got a bit more screen time in this episode. You will see him a bit more if you look for him. Of course, he was on Battlestar Galactica, the remake, and Malarkey. Again, this is kind of when we really see Malarkey crack as well, because Malarkey is he's a bit like the heart of the company, isn't he? He's the character that's always upbeat, that's always cheerful, and then we'll see what happens to that person in the next episode. But I think some of the best acting in the entire show is in this episode. I don't think it's unfair to say that.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate assessment, I'd say.
Yeah, and then of course we shouldn't forget to mention Mr. Wahlberg, whose actual lines of speaking dialogue to other actors isn't that many, but of course he has the whole narration.
Yeah.
And he's pretty good in it, and this is the first major thing I'd seen him in. So
I thought he was exceptional. Actually, I really, it was his episode, wasn't it? Really.
I mean, I can go through and mention all of the cast, and I won't. I mean, even the people in the small roles, Muck and Pinkella, the two actors there. And
can I say a quick word on Muck and Pinkella?
Yes, please.
Super quick word on that. I haven't got a long quote to read or anything, but in the book and in the other book I've got about sort of the real Band of Brothers and stuff. Apparently everyone loved Muck. And when he died, apparently a lot of them say just the morale of the whole company took a hit with that one.
Yeah.
For some reason, everyone. Well, not for some reason. He was loved for a reason, because he was a great guy or whatever. But when their foxhole took a direct hit, and it seems like they were pretty much completely blown to bits.
At least it would have been quick.
Well, yeah, right, yeah. That is the biggest fear, that you're sort of ripped half open by an artillery shell, and then you're in pain for hours and hours and hours or days, and then die. Yeah, everyone hoped that if they were going to get hit, it would be quick. Yeah, but yeah, just to say, because we haven't said it much, and even the show, there's a bit about it, but not much. Whereas in the book, they say that the death, particularly of Muck, well, they called him Skip. Everyone felt that, and apparently also his family. Of course, everyone is devastated when a member of your family died, but apparently his family were particularly. It's hard to say that, but it were particularly hard hit. That even decades and decades later, they could sort of barely talk about it and stuff,
right?
Because he was so loved even back home, and there's all sorts of stories about what a great guy was. So I just wanted to say that when he got mentioned there.
No, we
haven't really talked about
that's him in the middle of this shot, I believe. The actor who played him. I'm just going to get his name because it escapes me. Because I feel we should give him a shout out. Because the full name of the character was Warren Skip Muck, but everybody called him Muck. Richard Spite Jr. is who played the role, and he is an American. He's now also a director. Richard Spite Senior. I'm just wondering if that's somebody we should know.
I do apologise. I believe it's pronounced Spate.
Thank you so much. And
sorry.
No. You're quite right to pick me up on that kind of thing. And if you don't, I'm sure chat will. He received a Hugo Award nomination for his directing debut on the television series Supernatural. and he's done 5 episodes of Supernatural. So yeah, Spate. I think you are right there. I think his father was in the industry as well, I believe. But yes, I mean he's in 7 episodes of Band of Brothers, so I think he's in every episode up to this point. Just not given. I mean, I suspect the character probably had more dialogue than ended up in the show, and perhaps that's my only criticism of this episode. Hubler, Muck, and Pinkella are the 3 long-standing characters in this episode that all die, and they're 3 of the characters that, whilst yes, they've got a line here, a line there. Certainly, when I watched it the first time, they're the 3 of the characters I felt I got to know the least. But now that I've rewatched the show and I've really analysed every time we cut to a shot, who's in it, how much screen time do they get, I have realised that there was quite an effort made to keep cutting to shots of these guys to remind the viewer these are guys that are in the platoon. That's Webb on the left, who dies in this episode as well.
We lose loads of guys in this, don't we? Loads. When I first saw it, I was shocked that Gardner was out of it. I'd convinced myself that old Gonorrhea was going to make it through without a scratch. I don't know why. I convinced myself of that, just the way his character was and the way. And then when he's not, I'm like, oh God, it's just got real, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really well handled, and that whole device of the church and Lipton doing that narration, and all the people that have died or have been wounded are actually in that scene, but they all start fading out as he recounts which ones have either been killed, wounded, or taken off the line. Brilliant device. I love dramatic devices like that. We'll talk about the baseball game, which of course never happened in the last episode, but it's such a brilliant dramatic device. It works really well. Does anybody want to give any other actor a shout out at all in this episode? I think we probably covered everybody who gets significant. I mean, Winters and Nix are in this episode, but not really. You know, they've got a couple of lines here and there. So we get a bit more with Shifty. Peter Youngblood Hills, who's a British actor. I have written to him. I wrote to him the last time I watched Band of Brothers, the time before this, which was a year ago. And I'll talk about it when we get to it, but he has a little speech in episode 10, and I burst into tears during that scene. I think it was probably because I was going through my divorce at the time, but so I was a little bit fragile, but it really hit me, like way more powerful. So it's nice to see him get a bit more screen time, and it's good that he does, because it sets up things for later. Actually, the actor who plays Hubler, we should mention, Peter McCabe. What was he like inside Man? Do you remember? You must have got to know him a bit, because he was around for most of it.
Yeah, he was around for most of it. I can't really say that I got to know him, but I heard, had the odd kind of little, few words here and there. Nothing particularly memorable, but he seemed to be very popular. Another very, very popular person, and quite a little bit of a wit, I believe, on set as well.
Right.
Quite the funny guy.
Well, that's quite good, because that's sort of quite in keeping with his character and the fact that he was popular. And then when he died, the actors must have, that must have made that scene easier in some ways to achieve.
And also, what was quite interesting was that so many of these actors did stay in character.
Right.
Particularly when, like Del Dye would come over to them and say, okay, I've just spoken to the director, and what they want you to do is this, and this. And they all seem to kind of snap into their characters, even though there was no, there's no cameras pointing at them or anything like that. There was no real necessity for it, but that was quite interesting.
There was a huge number of British or Irish actors
Yeah.
faking American accents. Would
Yeah.
a lot of them keep their American accents up
Yes,
the
they
whole
did.
day?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think
it was.
that's good practice.
Yeah, it was really good. I mean, I mean, I'm getting back to George Khalil, who played Sergeant Ali, and he was in it pretty much most of the way through. Well, I think he's a really fine actor. I think he's an excellent actor. I don't know whether he's still acting, but when we were talking, we were just kind of, really just sort of chatting about nothing really, and he was really, he really kept that accent, and I genuinely thought that he was an American. But he was great. I really liked him. I liked him a lot. Him and Alex Sabga, another guy. Alex Sabga played Mellet, who you don't
Right.
kind of really see. He was with us around the haystack. He was one of the mortar guys um, around the haystack. But you actually see at the end when Lipton says about, we lost this person, and this person as well. And he looks around and you see the bodies on the floor, and it's one of them is Mellet, Alex Sapka.
Yeah, that's right.
But I believe I can't say this for sure, but I believe that from what I heard that his death scene was actually shot, that they did actually film his death scene, did
Right.
film him getting. I can't say that for certain, but I I seem to recall that somewhere in the back of my mind. I might have misremembered, but I, you know,
Oh, I think it's probably quite likely.
mm,
There's all sorts of stuff that ends up on the cutting room floor.
mm,
George Khalil uh, is no, he's not currently acting. His last acting
it's
role
not.
was 2009. He was in a film called Pterodactyl, which I feel I need to watch. 2005.
Yeah,
Um,
sounds good.
but yeah, and right, okay, I know who he is. He was in Rise of the Foot Soldier. I know exactly who he is. Anyway, okay. So, well, if no one else has got anything to say about the actors, we'll quickly move on to this next section, which will be reasonably short, but very complimentary.
Tonight, we're gonna have to cross the river.
This crowd's gonna catch some hell.
Well, this episode has actually got both practical and visual effects in it by the bucket load. The good news is that you don't notice most of the visual effects. The planes that came in, by the way, in episode 6, Inside Man, I wanted to ask you if they were real or CGI.
CG.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, in the attack, there's a lot of practical stuff. The visual effects, mostly apart from breath and that kind of thing, I think are just to kind of extend or cover up things that the snow couldn't, or they didn't have enough snow for. Am I right in thinking that?
Believe it or not, the snow was. If I was to tell you that it was very extensive coverage of snow,
Oh, I believe you.
you honestly, it was the amount of ground that they covered with snow, the amount of trees that they covered with snow, and several meters inside the woods as well, the forest as well. It was extensive, to say the least. I mean, truly extensive. Um, and also, one of the things is part of the special effects, I suppose. When we were when we were kind of in close up, or when we were kind of around the haystack being shot, when I say being shot, I mean being filmed, we'd have one of the effects guys come over to us, and he'd have a water spray, and what they do is they'd squirt this water spray on the helmet, the shoulders, and across the tunic, and a big bag of this stuff which looked like salt, and they just literally, close your eyes, chuck it at you by the handful, and this stuff would stick to the all the wet areas, and it would look like frost, because what would happen is it would expand. It would expand, and it would stay on the helmet and on the tunic and everything. So it looked like, for all intents and purposes, looks like fresh snow that's actually just dropped on you.
Right.
I don't know what the substance is, but it kind of it resembles salt, so it's that kind of consistency. But once it actually gets onto anything wet, it sort of expands and starts looking like sort of little patches of snow. Really interesting stuff. Funny enough, I've actually got a couple of buckets of it in my shed.
I wonder where they came from.
That was actually a good friend of mine from Effects Associates.
Right.
That used to be based over at Palmer Studios, and they were getting rid of a load of stuff, and I managed to get a few, blag a few little bits and pieces. So, but yeah, it was extensive, the coverage of snow. Yes, I'd say that there were digital set extensions as well, in order to just kind of expand the scope of it and everything. But it was a really good marriage.
Yeah, I can imagine. The actual battle scene of Foy, how long did that take to film, and how many cameras did they have, and sort of what kind of numbers of setups were you doing per day?
I wasn't there for all of that. So when a lot of that was done, I mean, I can remember spending 2 days on that. Plenty of pretty swift setups, because obviously they weren't locked off cameras. Everything was handheld, not steady cam, but handheld. So setups were pretty swift, so turnover in terms of coverage over the course of the day was pretty quick. Really whizzed through it, and that's the advantage of having handheld. No locked off cameras, no dollies, nothing like that. But yeah, it was pretty quick. I was there for a couple of days on that, the whole kind of Foy battle and everything after everything else.
Is there any other, before we move on, so needless to say, production design, effects work on this absolutely first class, especially the makeup that we mentioned earlier. Are there any, is there a story or anything concerning the filming, particularly of the battle sequence, that you might want to recount for us?
Yeah, there was okay, so there was one part where the bit where Spears comes running towards us, me and Dyke and all the others.
Yeah, he takes over and then storms into Foy. Yeah.
Well, there was another take of that, and of course he's running along, and I'm not sure whether he tripped, but somehow there was this sort of explosion. And it looked like he'd been fired out of a cannon, and he did this somersault and landed on his feet. So through this explosion, and then come running over to us. So it was kind of like really weird just watching him run, and suddenly it did this complete somersault, landing on his feet, and then got straight over to us. But also a lot of the camera crew, when we were running out of the woods and running towards Foy, obviously they were running backwards, so they were running equally as fast as us. So they were trying to run backwards with these cameras, holding these cameras, and to stay in focus. So as they're running backwards, some of them were falling down the craters, the covered craters, and some of them were tripping over some of the bush stumps that had been, cut up and then covered in snow. So you got all these cameramen sort of running backwards and falling arse over tit, and ended up, shooting most of the sky rather than shooting most of us. So they had a pretty tricky job. And the camera crew were excellent on this, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, and I mean, this is still the I can't remember what Band of Brothers was shot on, but I don't think they were shooting digital cameras, were they?
No, they weren't. No. Although there was a digital, we did actually see a digital playback.
Right.
After some of the stuff, and it was the first time I'd actually seen a digital playback. The first time ever I'd seen a digital playback, and it was actually on this episode, and it was actually on the attack on Foy. And it was the very, very first time that I'd seen it, and a few of us were invited to go into this big sort of, I suppose, marquee, and it was on like a laser disc that had been burned. So there was, it was actually a big gold laser disc.
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
big gold laser disc on, and yeah, we watched some of the footage. So it was kind of recording some digital playback as well as recording on film. So yeah, and that was the very, very first time, and that was back in 2000. So the very first time that I'd ever seen a digital playback on anything.
Because the show itself was shot on 35mm.
Yeah.
Probably one of the last television shows to be shot on 35mm, I would think, because even back then, not many TV shows were shooting on 35mm unless they had a ton of money.
I think it was just kind. We were just at that sort of almost at the tipping point, almost at the digital age tipping point. I think it was just a couple of years after that when things really exploded.
Yeah. And well, they were it was Aeroflex cameras, because I mean, top of the range stuff.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, they're all of them.
time.
Yeah, it was Arri. They were all Arri cameras.
Well, let's so production design, nothing else to add really. Now we're all going to fight over the same clip for this bit.
Remember what you were taught? I guarantee you gravity will take care of the rest.
Now I'm going to put a $5 down that History Bro and I have got the same clip for favorite moments on this show. But History Bro, you're my guest, I'm going to let you go first.
Before we do that,
I'm going to put a $5 down and say that I know exactly what both of your clip is going to be.
Okay.
Before we do it, because I know this sort of rounds out the show, is it all right if I can do a couple more little bits?
Yeah, but you can put them at the end when we're doing final thoughts if you want.
Oh well, all right then.
Well, I don't mind. That's fine. If you want to chuck in something now, that's fine.
All right, well, I'll chuck in one thing and then leave the last bit, which is all about the numbers and the casualties. And
do that at the very end.
Okay, so just before that, I wanted to talk about how just sort of the strategic, because it's talked about in the book a fair bit, the strategic, why was the Battle of the Bulge sort of so desperate, really? And one of the reasons was that actually the Allies, the US Army, or the British Army and the US Army combined, didn't really have enough men. They didn't do what is called full mobilization. So even though there was the draft, of course, they didn't insist that every man from the age of 18 to 45 go and fight in Europe or in the Pacific. They didn't do that. And so we're told that, the reason why Easy or the 101st or the 506th had to keep fighting, while sometimes guys were at their breaking limits, was because they literally didn't have enough men. And Ambrose says, here's a line, they simply did not have enough troops for the job. And later he says, but Eisenhower wanted action, Monty wanted action, Taylor wanted action, Sink wanted action. So the 2nd Battalion, HQ, Dog, Easy and Fox companies would have to provide it. So there you go. There's a thing that doesn't often get said about World War II, is that we really could have done with a few more men on our side in the West anyway. Okay, on to my favourite bit.
Would it be this moment by any chance with Spears doing his run through the village?
Oh no.
Oh well, that's okay. What tell us what yours?
Okay, that is a brilliant bit. This is probably it's either this or episode 6 is my favorite episode. I can't decide which one I like more.
Right.
And it's the bit when Winters sees that Dyke has lost his bottle, and goes to run forward, and Sink calls him back and starts trying to chew him out, saying, "I know it was easy coming." And Winters just completely blanks him and just bellows over him. Spears, get over here! You get and relieve him. That bit, that moment.
Yeah, which is just prior to this.
Yeah, it's just prior to that. It's where Winters just ignores, takes Sink's order to not go in there himself, but then blanks him and just carries on the job of being a battalion commander. I just love that bit. Unfortunately, in the book, Sync isn't involved. That was a little bit of artistic license with the screenwriters, it seems. Anyway, if you believe the book, Winters Winters checked himself.
It was probably Dale Dye saying, I think I should have a line here.
Yeah. Well, either way, because it's a little disappointing because the bit in the show is so good that I wished it was completely true. It seems like Winters just checked himself. Anyway,
right.
I've always loved that bit. The first time I saw that bit, I almost got like a tingle down the spine, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it might be my favorite bit of the whole series. So, okay.
Wow. Oh, favorite bit of the...
yourself over here.
That bit, yeah, exactly that bit.
Relief Dyke and take that attack on in.
Damn.
I like that. And Spears doesn't even hesitate. He
He
doesn't even say yes, sir, or anything. He's just in there.
Yep.
Straight away. And Lipton then does that whole speech about how not only did he take the attack in, but he also, made contact with I Company, and then he came back. And you've got I love that bit, and they're playing the music, the iconic, and the Germans are like naturally confused. And now, were you Inside Man? Were you there when this whole section was being shot? Because there's quite a lot of going on and a lot of people in it. I would have assumed all extras on board.
Yeah, it was. It really was an all hands on deck situation.
So you were there when this whole bit was shot with Matthew Settle running through?
Yeah.
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 Was that? I imagine this was probably a day, was it, to shoot this section?
It was only a day, yeah. I mean, like I say, I was only there on this on this particular part for a couple of days. I seem to recall that the whole thing was most of this was done in just the one day. Because we sort of reached a point in production. Sorry, I do apologize. We reached a point in production where when we sort of hit episode 6, 7, 8, we really whizzed through them. I think there was a rhythm that everybody found, that in particular the crew found, that rhythm was really hit on 6, because I think they were the only ones that we really did in proper order, chronological order, and we just seemed to whiz right through them.
Right. That's interesting to hear. So one of the things I should have mentioned in production design, which I wanted to get confirmation from you, and I remember discussing this with Alan Tomkins, this is one of the sets where if you shot towards Foy from the woods, it was the town of Foy. But at the back of the Foy set was the river trench for Hagenau, and then shot the other way, it was Hagenau. I'm pretty sure I'm right.
I've actually got the plans for both Foy and Hagenau. I've got the blueprints for both of those sets.
You're telling me they're two totally different sets?
They're two totally different sets, yeah.
Fucking sure that's what Alan said to me,
Yeah.
but it was a long time ago, and I might be wrong. But
I actually have the set blueprints for both of those sets.
Right.
I've got 2 Hagenau blueprints.
Would they have both been built in this same location though, and it kind of like major redressing? Maybe, I don't know if that's what he meant.
I think maybe part of Hagenau, or what became Hagenau, was kind of utilized as Foy, as part.
Yeah, because there's
kind of partially utilized as Foy.
There's one very distinctive house that appears in both towns, and I'm sure it's just the same building redressed. But it appears at opposite ends, which is why it feels like they used this same location, completely rebuilt, redressed it, shot the other way from the other side. But as you say, that it might have been almost a complete rebuild, of course. But I'm sure they were both this location, though, weren't they? Is that what you're telling me? Hagenau was built in a different part of the park.
so Foy was where you see it literally, yeah, I suppose 200 yards away from the woods,
Hmm.
right? So on the Hatfield House estate, Hagenau was at Hatfield Studios, which is probably about half a mile away.
Right.
So they're two completely different locations for the
Oh,
two.
okay.
I'm sure parts of Hagenau, or what became Hagenau, were used as little kind of insert shots for Foy and so on and so forth.
Well, I suppose it's not beyond the realms of possibility that buildings would be taken down at one set and rebuilt at another location, but same wood, same basic architecture, but they might redo the roof or
the only problem with the only problem with that is that it becomes very, very expensive because it's more time consuming to do that. So
right.
it's a lot less time consuming because obviously, as we know in this business, time is invariably money.
Yeah.
So to have the two sets up at the same time, so literally as soon as we were off this, we were straight on to episode 8, so the last
Right.
patrol.
Which I mean, almost all of it takes place in the Hagenau set, basically.
Yeah, and that was all over Hatfield. That was at Hatfield Studios.
I mean, well, so sticking with standout moments, I mean, this is definitely it for me. I love this. I mean, for all the emotional punch of definitely one of the most difficult and moving moments of the entire series is that shot of Garnier and Joe Toy.
Yeah.
Both and Buck Compton. And I mean, I could say that is the emotional gut punch moment of the episode for me. But in terms of like hitting me in the feels and like, this moment with Matthew Settle, and he must have loved filming this. This must have been great fun to shoot. I mean, knackering, but fun. You can see it's quite warm there, actually. The weather. Yeah.
It was,
he must have loved doing that. Running around with a Thompson, what's not to like?
Yeah.
So, Blue Collar, you got a favorite moment or line?
It's
I know it's hard to pick one, but do your best.
Like you said, Lance, right here, this part, because of the music and seeing the ghost disappear. It's
such a good scene, actually. I mean, I could have easily picked this as well. Yeah.
I mean, definitely my favorite character, hands down, is Neil McDonough, because the way just Buck, the only way you could describe Buck is a broken man. He's just broken.
Yeah.
But his eyes, his acting, and just like that's quality acting. But like you said, Lance, the music right here, it's just that just adds to the dead, seeing the ghost disappear, and that just boy, that hit me hard. And it was not easy to watch.
No, no. It really
and I believe
isn't.
that this was actually filmed in a real convent as well.
Oh, and so they got like a real, they got a real choir probably for it, I imagine.
Yeah, and top of like the way, like the
this is. I believe this was a real convent.
Harold Webb,
man.
Yeah, and then we see because I do remember the first time I watched B.O.B. and that scene happened. They were reeling off these lists of all these people who had died, and I was thinking, hang on, I don't remember who half these people are. I feel like I should know these people. Buck Compton, obviously, when they say lost the leader, but in Buck Compton.
Yeah,
that of course.
That right there, look at that, man. Like,
yeah, I know.
That's just, and as you're saying, Lance, is just right there as he grabs, he's reading them, like he's trying to cheer him up and give him better spirits. He just grabs the letter and just doesn't care anymore.
Yeah, it's absolutely gut wrenching. Incidentally, by the way, because I'm going to do a detailed video about it. I went to buy the Blu-ray of Masters of the Air, and they haven't released it. It's the hard copy of it is not available, so I was quite surprised.
That's like he says, it's not so much what happened to Buck, it's like watching these people that he's been friends with for who knows how long, watching your friends watching your friends get like their limbs blown off, or at one point like having a mortar, seeing your two friends be incinerated right in front of you, and there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, pretty gut wrenching stuff.
Well, maybe I could lead us out with talking about.
Could I just quickly give my favourite? Can I just quickly give my
I thought you
favourite?
already had. Sorry, apologies.
No.
Yeah, sorry, we haven't done Inside Mans yet.
Sorry.
I mean, I know he was on the show, but
my favourite scene, and it's probably a little bit of bias here, and that's the bit where we're all stuck behind the haystack with Dyke, and then Spears comes running over. It was just such a fantastic day when we shot that. It was, it was indescribable. It was one of the most fun days I think I've had on the whole show. But having said that, every other moment that everybody else has mentioned as well could quite easily rival that. So, is that my favorite moment? It's my favorite moment for a different reason.
Yeah, while you were filming. But what about just standing back and watching the show? Do you have a, do you have a favorite moment there?
It's really hard to choose. It's such a difficult one because this really is my favorite episode. And there are so many moments in there.
I got that queued up, Lance.
All three of your moments have been really, really good choices, and I can't think of one that could possibly trump those.
Yeah, difficult choices indeed.
And this is almost superhero, but I don't care. It looks badass.
Yeah.
I love that bit where he comes running through, and I think that is actually Matthew Settle doing that.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So they would be like, "Don't worry, Matthew. We'll definitely set it off."
He just goes right there.
Not while you're. Okay, good. Well, I'm going to run pretty fast. So.
It's like Inside Man said, he just without missing a beat, instantly just tells Dyke, "Here you go." It's like,
I'm taking over.
Yeah.
And he starts spitting out orders, just not even hesitating. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
It's such a significant moment. This is kind of a turning point in the episode, isn't it? This is kind of the real turning point of the episode.
Yeah.
I'll stick with this. I'll stick with that.
All right. Well, let me hand over to History Bro to do the sort of final historical points, and then we can just give final thoughts before we wrap up.
Yeah. So the real history, a couple of things then about. Well, I'll just let Ambrose pick up. He says Easy's losses were heavy. Exact figures are impossible to come by. In the hurry-up movement out of Marmelon, the company roster was not completed. Replacements came in as individuals or in small groups, and were not properly accounted for on the roster. Wounded men dropped out of the line only to come back a few days later. An estimate is that Easy went into Belgium with 121 officers and men, received about 24 replacements, and came out with 63. So that's remarkable. The Easy men killed in action in Belgium were Sergeant Warren Muck, Corporal Francis Mellet, and Privates AP Heron, Harold Webb. So they had 2 Webbs. They were both killed. Carl Sorosco, John Swindell, Don Hubler, Harold Hayes, Alex Pancala, and John Julian. The best description of the cost of the Battle of the Bulge to Easy Company comes from Private Webster. And somewhere else on the other page, he describes Webster as a man of books. Because he famously went to Harvard, wasn't it? He was a man of books and libraries, a reader and a writer, sensitive, level-headed, keenly observant, thoughtful, and well-educated. And he goes to lengths to say how he would never have. Webster made a conscious decision to be an enlisted man, and otherwise would never have met all these guys, probably. But anyway, he says Webster's the best description is from Webster, who joined the company during the truck ride to Alsace. He had been wounded in early October. It was mid-January. Webster wrote, "When I saw what remained of the first platoon, I could have cried. 11 men were left out of 40. 9 of them were old soldiers who had jumped into Holland or Normandy or both. McCreary, Liebgott, Marsh, Cobb, Wiseman, Lyle, Martin, Raider, and Schulte. Although the other 2 platoons were more heavily stocked than the first, They were so under strength that, added to the first, they wouldn't have made a normal platoon, much less a company. Beyond the wounded and killed, every man at Bastogne suffered. Every man. Men unhit by shrapnel or bullets were nevertheless casualties. There were no unwounded men at Bastogne. As Winters put it, I'm not sure that anybody who lived through that one hasn't carried it with him in some hidden ways, the scars. Perhaps that is the factor that keeps easy men bonded so unusually close together. They knew each other at a level only those who... Oh, this is Ambrose. That was the end of the Winters quote. Ambrose goes on. They knew each other at a level only those who have fought together in a variety of tactical situations can achieve, as only those who endured together the extreme suffering and combined cold, not enough food, and little sleep while living in constant tension. They knew fear together, not only the fear of death or wound, but the fear that all of this was for nothing. And there's a section there which I won't read, all about how, you fear that you go through all this, and was it even the right war? That sort of thing. But anyway, last bit I'll read, just 3 or 4 lines here.
No, sure.
They got through the bulge because they had become a band of brothers. The company had held together at that crucial moment in the snow outside Foy because First Sergeant Lipton and his fellow NCOs, nearly all Tacoma men, provided leadership, continuity, and cohesiveness. Despite a new CO and new officers and enlisted recruits, the spirit of E Company was alive, thanks to the sergeants. So I thought that was a touching little paragraph.
Yeah. Indeed. Well, time to give our scores out of 10, gentlemen. I'll begin. This one's a 10 for me, hands down. We'd like to see your scores in the chat as well. Superb production design, incredible acting, good script. I could knock off half a point for them very heavily implying, especially with the ginormous blood squib that goes off behind the haystack, that Dyke was killed in this attack. If I had to knock off anything, it'd be for that. I guess I'd call it 9.5, but I'm going to let that slide. So it's a 10. Blue Collar.
Yeah, easily 10 for me. And as I told you before, making stills sometimes is difficult for certain episodes, but this is hands down the hardest episode to just make that many stills. Like I could have made 10 times as many stills. And it was, I actually watched the episode in sections because it was hard to watch in a sense, because seeing what these guys were going through, like just the way, between having Dyke messing up and then costing people their lives, seeing Buck break down. Like I just would watch 15 minutes, get up, take a 5-minute break, make some more stills. So I watched this in like 15-minute segments because it was hard to watch the entire episode, and it was like watching a live action full movie. Like Inside Man said, if they would have took 2 episodes and made a whole theater movie, I'd easily go pay $10-15 or now and go watch this in a theater.
Yeah, thanks to Inside Man, I am definitely going to do, I've been working on a mega cut of Bridge Too Far. I'm definitely going to do a mega cut of Battle of the Bulge and give us all the Battle of the Bulge film we always wanted. And I'm going to, most of both of these episodes is going to be in it, but along with the German narrative and all kinds of other stuff. So,
I'll tell you, Linton, I was talking about action sequences. When they start firing the artillery, that's at the 32-minute mark. That's a half-hour sequence. That entire sequence. So I can understand when Inside Man said it probably took a month to film this. That's 30 minutes in a row of an action. That's the practical effects, the shooting, but a half-hour segment in one episode of a TV show. It's astonishing.
Yeah.
History Bro.
Oh, easily a 10. I've said it a couple of times, but episodes 6 and 7 are my favorite episodes, and I give them both hands down a 10. If I could give it an 11, I would. It's some of the best TV I've ever seen.
Yeah, agreed.
Simple as that. So it's a 10 for me.
It's funny, I'm on Google Earth here, and this is the town of Foy. And it's really just a village at a crossroads with a church, a town hall, and probably it might have had 20 houses back then, if that many. It's really not big, and it's not expanded much in the time that it's been here. I have been there. I did a really extensive Battle of the Bulge tour. If you can ever go on one, it's well worth doing. You can see that these are some of the woods that were shelled. The bomb craters are still there. In relation to Bastogne, you can see this is how far out of Bastogne it is. The Bastogne Museum and Memorial, well worth doing. This museum is really, really good. This memorial is very moving, and you can actually climb up to the top of this thing and get a full view of the entire area around Bastogne. You get a sense of where everything was, and it tells you which company was in which woods, and so you can see how far out Easy Company were. And there's various grave sites, and Foyer's just here. So there you go. Fab, Inside Man, you want to give a rating there for this one?
What more can I add? I mean, it's a very solid 10 from me. I mean, I couldn't add anything more to what History Bro and Blue Collar Loser has already said.
Right.
I just, it's my absolute favorite episode. It's the one that really affects me, I think, more than any.
Right.
But it's so beautifully shot. It's so beautifully told. It's beautifully acted. And it gives me everything that I want from, any TV show. And that's, emotion, entertainment, and, along with, some informative information as well. And it's just amazing. So it is an amazing piece of television. And I'd agree with History Bro, exactly what he says. It's one of the best pieces of television that you're ever likely to see. Not just in this series, but in any TV series.
Yeah, well, we'll certainly be dissecting that when we do episode 10, and I think there's going to be quite a big panel on that. Well, we've got some. So I think, in summary.
Hold on, what's your score? What's your score? Come on.
I already gave it 10. I said 10 at the beginning.
Did you?
I said 10. Yeah, you were asleep at that point because I was talking. Coming up, we've got some pretty interesting things. In fact, this is a really packed week. So tomorrow we've got 2 streams. Tuesday we've got a stream. Wednesday we've got 2 streams, and then we're back with Band of Brothers again on Sunday. So let me just quickly outline those for you before my guests plug everything. So first of all, tomorrow at 6 p.m, I'm going to be interviewing Adrian Sherlock, who's an author of sort of British sci-fi shows, old classic shows like The Tomorrow People. He also does guidebooks on Blake Seven. Those kinds of shows. I actually bought the Tomorrow People one.
Right.
So I do have it. And he's coming on at 6 o'clock. He's in Australia, but he's also an insomniac. So he said, "Oh, my time 4 a.m. or something would be best for me," and it was like 6 p.m. So I'm doing that at 6 p.m. But that works out well because on Mondays at 8 we normally do House of Dragon, but I'm changing the time on that to 8:30. So we're doing House of Dragon tomorrow at 8:30. Blue Collar will be back on with me on that one, and then obviously when History Bro's up to date on his Westeros historical facts, he'll be coming on towards the end of that season to tell us all the extra details we need to know. But on Wednesday, I was approached by an actor recently via Instagram. "Hey Lance, I saw your breakdown of Alive, really loved it. Just to let you know, I'm a massive fan of your channel. I'd love to come on sometime." And I looked up the actor who contacted me, and I thought straight away, this is fake. This has got to be a fake account. This is going to be another fake James Brolin job. But I was polite, like I always am. Thank Christ I was polite, because it turned out to be the real guy. And that's actor Jose Zuniga, who's got an absolutely amazing career. He's done all these different roles. Hispanic actor who first feature film was Alive. He played the mechanic in Alive.
Right. Yeah.
But he's also been in The Shield. Chicago PD, amazing role in Snowfall. Me and him had a half an hour video call yesterday. So much to my great relief, it definitely is him. And he is coming on the channel on Wednesday at 9 for an industry interview. And I'm hoping to have Australian film director Matthew Holmes on that as well. So, and he's got 176 credits on IMDb, acting wise.
Wow.
Done a huge number of films and TV shows. So he's going to be an absolutely fantastic guest. But also, more good news. On top of that, if we just talk about Band of Brothers again for a second. Now, he wanted to come on tonight, but couldn't make it tonight, annoyingly. But before the end of our run, I expect to have a couple of the cast on from BOB. The first one to confirm he's definitely going to come on is Shane Taylor, who played Doc Rowe.
Fantastic.
Oh, wow.
So Shane is definitely coming on. He wanted to come on last week because, of course, last week was very much his episode.
Yeah.
But he's probably not available until we do our last episode. So I'm hoping to get him on for a little slot. And obviously, we'll just let him do all the talking once he gets on and he can tell us various stories. I really rate Shane as an actor.
Yes.
I like every time I see him in something, he's always good. And this was his breakout role.
Yeah.
So Shane's going to be coming on as well. So on Wednesday night, unfortunately, also Blue Collar and I might have to do the next episode of Star Wars: The Acolyte because we started it.
It's only four. It's only 4 more to go, man. We're almost there.
Oh, so painful.
It's only 4.
And I'm quite positive and constructive when reviewing stuff. Even when we did Masters of the Air, I always tried to be okay. You know, Belgian chimney designs aside, what else do I like in this episode? But sometimes you start reviewing something that you hope might be good, and it's like you've had a really bad curry, and it's going to stay with you for a long time. So we might be doing the Acolyte on Wednesday after, probably about 11:30 after we've done the Yosei Zuniga interview. And then next Sunday we've got Band of Brothers: The Last Patrol. It should be at the usual time at 8 o'clock. If we need to change it, we'll let you know. It might go a bit later, but I think probably 8 o'clock. There might be one Sunday that we have to miss out. So there may be a week in July where we skip a week, but I'll let you know ahead of time when that's going to be. So Blue Collar, you got anything you want to plug, sir?
Oh, yeah. After this, I'm going to finish up my House of Dragon episode with my cousin. It just, time's always against us. We couldn't do a live show. We couldn't record till Thursday. I've seen the Bike Riders, and like people know, it's like...
Oh, yeah. How was the Bike Riders?
We'll talk about Tuesday.
Oh, okay. I forgot. Nelson ratings at 10 o'clock on Tuesday as well.
Too much stuff. So after this, I'm going to finish the episode. I got 55 minutes done out of 1 hour because people know it's like I told my cousin, you start getting, I guess, anal and specific about your audio. And whenever people breathe or cough or something, I take that stuff out. But it's very time consuming because people naturally breathe or cough. But, it just makes it sound a little bit better, more professional. So I'm going to finish that right now. And then, I'll see you tomorrow for House of Dragon recap.
Indeed. I actually do look forward to hearing about the Bike Riders and whether I should be dashing out to the cinema to see it. So we're going to discuss that on Tuesday night on 10 o'clock on the Nielsen ratings. History Bro, Big Dave is asking, where did you get that glorious chair, and is it available on the History Bro merchandise Dr. Evil Chair website?
No, this is part of the lotuseaters.com secondary set, which was supposed to be like a bit of a reading, a faux library. It's actually there's actually a bank of cameras that way, so it's a studio. It's not my living room or anything, and I had no input into buying them. I actually did have quite a lot of input into what the overall look should be. I wanted it to look like like sort of a smoking room in a gentleman's club, and and then lo and behold, one day these chairs turn up. So yeah, that's all I can tell you really on that.
Right.
But
anything coming up you want to plug at all?
Yeah, so first of all, there's my channel, History Bro. The last thing on there is an hour-and-a-half chat with retired squadron leader Tim Davies, all about D-Day, recorded on D-Day. The next thing to go up will be a piece of content all about Japan's road to Pearl Harbor. So how Japan found itself doing a sneak attack on the 7th of December.
Yeah.
41. So that's the next thing that will go up on History Bro. As for Epochs of the Lotus Eaters, my history show on Lotus Eaters, my personal show, the last thing that went up there was what was it? I went up today. Yeah, it was a full breakdown about The Lion in Winter, the film The Lion in Winter, all about Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, with Peter O'Toole and Anthony Hopkins and Timothy Dalton and Catherine Hepburn, Academy Award winning. Brilliant. One of my, possibly my favourite film of all time. I'm loath to give one favourite film of all time, but it's certainly my top 5. So that's the last thing about. Next week, I'm going back to the death of the Roman Republic. I'll be talking about the life and career of Crassus.
Oh,
I was aware of Crassus, the member of the first triumvirate.
I'm friends with the actor who played him in Spartacus, the TV series.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah,
right.
and actually he has agreed to come on the show, but I'm waiting until because I'm going to do a rewatch of. We're going to do the same thing as this. We're going to do Spartacus. So I don't know if you're a fan of that series.
I've never watched it.
I feel you should. I feel you probably quite like it because I think they're reasonably faithful to as much of the history as is known as possible, and it is that 300 style of filmmaking that was trendy at the time. But for that show, it really works. Season 1 with Andy Whitfield is especially good. So it might be great if we were to do that. You could come on as the guest who's watching it for the first time and tell us.
Well, I mean, my angles history. So that Plutarch, the ancient historian Plutarch, does a life of Crassus, and also Appian, the ancient historian Appian, writes all about that period of the very, very late Republic, which I know sort of inside out and will be quoting from heavily in my thing. So I can talk all about the real history again. That is really my bag. And then, of course...
have you been to Rome, History Bro? You must have.
I've been to Rome like 5 times.
Have you taken the Cinecittà film studios tour? Because you can, and they still have the set for Rome, the TV series Rome.
No, I've never done that.
The main set is still standing, and it's really, really good set, and it's been reused in loads of other TV shows and films, even in an episode of Doctor Who.
Like I say, I'm such a history nerd that I would love to go there. I wouldn't not go there out of principle or anything, but I'd like to go to the real forum, though, the actual forum of Rome, the real thing. That is a bit like a set. Have you ever been to Rome, Lance?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
You know, when you walk through the forum, which is obviously right next to the Colosseum, it feels like a set in a weird way.
It does. I know exactly what you mean.
Just quickly to say, last spring equinox, I went to Stonehenge, and they actually allow you to walk in and among the actual stones of Stonehenge a couple of times a year on solstice and on equinox. And I did that, and that felt like a set. Walking among the stones of Stonehenge, because I was one of the first there, so it wasn't packed with people. That felt like a set, at least in a weird way. Anyway, a couple of last things just to quickly plug. I am, of course, on the daily live podcast of the Lotus Eaters a couple of times a week. And lastly, on Thursdays, I do a live stream with Mr. H Reviews and a panel there where we talk all about TV things. And we're going through the Acolyte. And oh man, it's the pits. Really is the pits. I kind of hate it.
Well, I could see the pain on your face, and again, to emphasize on this channel, I'm never looking to talk about something to bash just for the sake of bashing it, but the writing is so diabolical. It is beyond. It's beyond bad. It's beyond any kind of defense. I mean, it is indefensible. The writing. It's so terrible. The dialogue's so terrible. I tried every week to say, okay, what are the things I liked about it? This person's performance was okay. These costumes were quite nice, but you were really like, grasping at straws.
The last episode was one of the most boring things I've ever seen,
and just terrible. Probably one of the most terrible episodes of a really strong
written by a child or something. I know it isn't, but it's written by someone that isn't a writer. That's what it is.
Yeah, it certainly felt like that, and it obviously there were a lot of competing agendas and
Anyway, let's not mar this stream by talking about it for a moment longer.
That's enough. We have to talk about that on Wednesdays or Thursdays in your case, and that pain of itself is. Is there anything else you wanted to plug?
No, that's it. That's it.
Inside Man, was there anything you wanted to?
Yeah, well, I'm actually just getting to grips with excuse me, watching some indie exploitation movies, some Indiana Jones style rip-offs. From the 80s, mainly Italian. Yeah, mainly Italian.
I've seen most of them.
Yeah, at the moment I'm watching Invaders of the Lost Gold.
What's the one that pauses with the seaplane? It's like it freezes with the seaplane crossing the screen, and it's even got the same font as Raiders of the Lost Ark comes up. That's one of
them. That's not High Road to China, is it? Is it?
No. It's much more. No, High Road to China had a pretty decent budget.
It did. Yeah.
No, this is one of the Italian. But it might be a South American.
Would it be the Raiders?
Yeah, it might have Raiders in the title.
Yes. There's a slew of them. There's loads of them. It's like about
I think there is, and I think there's actually even one just called Raiders as well.
It's called Gold Raiders.
Something like that.
It's called, or Raiders of the Gold.
We should do a special stream on those.
And
we're gonna do a post-apocalyptic 1980s films, aren't we? So well, just before I remains for me to say thanks to the panel, thanks for everyone watching. Lots of comments and interest as always. Bo, just to tempt you, next time you go back, this is the Cinecittà Film Studio, and as you can see, this is the Roman set that's very much still standing. So this entire courtyard is all sort of Roman buildings on these various sides. Like this one is a big temple, etc. They've got sort of a half-built arena thing there. Something else at the front. This section here is actually the section of the Rome sets that burnt down, which housed all the interiors and the back streets. That caught fire and burnt down, sadly. But this main big thoroughfare, they've kept it because it's often used, and it's also you can take a walkthrough tour, and it's only like €20 or something, and they take you also through some of the sets of U-571, which I think you might find interesting. They're also at this location. Yeah, the interior of the submarine and part of the exterior is also, or certainly was when I went, was part of the tour. So worth mentioning there. Right. Okay. Well, that's it from us. We've been on long enough. It's 10 to 11. So thanks to everyone for coming on the channel. Thanks to everyone for the comments and so on. Don't forget, we're going to be back on Monday with 2 streams. I've got an interview at 6 o'clock UK time, slightly earlier than normal. And then, of course, Blue Collar Loser and I will be back at 8:30 to discuss House of Dragon Episode 2. Don't forget that interview with Jose Zuniga on Wednesday. That's going to be amazing. And if you must, you can join us for the Acolyte later. But thanks. Until then, we'll see you all again real soon.